markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Right now, well, we've got red on the screen. We've got the NASDAQ down about 0.5% on 90 points. We have the Dow, little change, down about 17 points, and the S&P 500 down 0.2%, or about 12 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.01%, down 6 basis points. The 10-year yield, 3.83%, and that's down about 3 basis points. To commodities, point out spot gold, $2,524 dollars an ounce. Brent crude, $77 a barrel. WTI crude, $74 a barrel. Another setback for Boeing. The company paused flight tests of its 777X jetliner. It's inspecting a damaged engine mount. That's the problem there. Boeing shares right now down about 4%. And shares of Palo Alto Networks, they're higher. They're up about 6%. It reported quarterly profit outlook beat expectation. The company also boosted its share buyback program. And the European Union said it plans to introduce a 9% tariff on Teslas imported from China. That tariff actually lower than expected, lower than the duty rate other manufacturers are facing, but Tesla shares still lower, down about 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, thanks so much, Lisa Mateo. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from Interactive Broker Studio right here in New York City. You can also check us out on YouTube as well. So back to the markets. Yeah, I appreciate nothing's really happening in the broader equity market. You are seeing a little bit of buying coming into the bond market, particularly in the front end. We all look towards Jackson Hole. I'm really into the revision of the labor data that we're going to get tomorrow. Is the Fed going to be particularly behind the curve? But we wanted to get a professional to weigh in on all of this. And Dryden Pence is Chief Investment Officer at Pence Wealth Management, and he joins us now in the studio. Dryden, what do you think? What do you think we're going to learn this week?
I think we're going to learn this week that the much predicted September rate cut is on the table.
Okay.
That labor data is probably going to be revised a little bit. I think people forgot that a lot of the labor data was affected by weather. And so you had people that were temporary or layoffs or things like that. So you get these anomalies that are, when we've all witnessed weather here lately in New York City. Yep. So those things have caused it to change a little bit. I think we'll find September's on the table. I think that we'll find that the economy is still robust and not as, while it's slowing, it's not slowing to the level that others are talking about. So I think we're going to find a benign move to a quarter cut in September, and then we're data dependent to see what happens in December.
We're just finishing up, I guess, this week, kind of earnings here. We've got some retailers coming in, as well as NVIDIA coming up to kind of put a punctuation mark on it next week. What did you make of the earnings season we just had? I think
it's been a robust earnings season. The point of the matter is you had this growth scare that freaked everybody out a couple of weeks ago. But the point of the matter is that we're seeing the broadening out of earnings. The earnings situation is that earnings recessions, rolling recessions turned into rolling recoveries. And so you're seeing the earnings of the rest of the 493 of the S&P 500 begin to move forward and come out. You're seeing about a 7-8% to 13% earnings growth there. And that bodes well for the whole broader part of the market. So we're moving from Magnificent Seven, where NVIDIA accounts for all the earnings growth, to the rest of the market moving forward. So that does one of two things. It either puts a floor under it by making it stronger and stable, or it moves the market forward as we go through the rest of the year.
But only for those that actually had that earnings growth. So where did you see it? For example, like Bank of America said all their clients bought everything last week except for energy and industrials. Like, where do you see that growth? Where do you not?
Well, I think that the issue is I began to see, as we look at this later part of the cycle, we're going to see industrials begin to do better, and we think we're going to see industrials and small caps, and you're beginning to see pieces of that. Most companies are beating their earnings growth estimates as that's all come out. We're almost all the way through earnings season, but I think as you get into late third quarter and fourth quarters, we're moving through this, and you're going to see companies begin to publish and begin to show even better earnings going forward. So it's the broadening out of the S&P 500 and also small caps and industrials. We think that are going to continue to see a regular cadence of improvement.
One of the companies on your list was actually in the news this week. AMD is a company that's on your list. They made an acquisition of ZT Systems, which is a technology company based in the bustling technology hub of Secaucus, New Jersey, I note. What's your AMD call?
We've liked AMD for a very long time, and we've owned it from when it was in some of our portfolios since it was a small cap and just out there. Now it's all the way it's moved up tremendously. So we've liked it for a very long time. We like AMD here too in terms of what they're doing with their company. They're sort of the number 2 in a lot of spaces, not only the advanced stuff but just kind of the everyday chips. We've always said buy chips on dips. And so we think that with AI, with everything going on, this acquisition is AMD kind of getting really serious about going after NVIDIA. And so I like companies that are number 2 and hungry.
Okay, so it's like an AMD, not NVIDIA story for you.
Right, exactly.
Gotcha. You also like Chipotle.
I do. And
do you like it without the CEO, Brian Niccol?
Well, the point that makes a big difference, and Starbucks needed to make a change. There's probably a good move there. But when you think about the consumer, consumers are what we call have now become more conscious. At one point coming out of the pandemic, it was going to buy anything at any price because everybody had all this liquidity. Now we're seeing that the consumer is being pickier. They want value. This is why if you contrast Chipotle and McDonald's, I mean, fast food is supposed to be fast and cheap. And when it becomes neither, right, then people move away from it. And you saw that with McDonald's. With Chipotle, people are seeing value in what they're spending. So you're continuing to see, okay, it's worth the extra money for what I'm getting, and I'm paying for that. And so that becomes a more stable move. So we think that the whole story here is about a conscious consumer. They're still spending money. More people are making more money than ever before, and they're spending it, but they're being more discerning about it, and they're being a little pickier.
What do you think about the consumer here? A lot of folks are saying there's really at least 2 consumers out there. The ones that own risk assets, whether stocks, bonds, real estate, they're doing fine, and maybe even more fine if the interest rates come down. And then there's everybody else who really feels the brunt of inflation in their pocketbook. Does that impact kind of the stocks you look at?
It does. I mean, we really do focus on, we look for big knowable themes driving consumer activity. We look for choke points or companies that really, have a kind of either monopolistic power or they're very key into that consumer behavior. So what we're seeing this trend of consumers being pickier. You have people at the lower end of the economic spectrum are certainly becoming stretched. Inflation is changing their behavior a little bit, but it's very interesting. Inflation expectations have come down now. People are beginning to make some changes in that, and you did see some real wage growth. So I think the big thing that the agenda, and whether it's politicians or anybody else, it takes a little time for these things to work their way through the economy. And I think that we're seeing some stabilization of it. And consumer confidence is probably beginning to get a little bit better, not a little bit worse. So I think this is an adjustment period that we're moving from a torrid pace of economic growth to a sustainable one.
Right, like just slowing, not slumping, basically. But, back to Chipotle for a second. So this is what I've heard from Paul. You said 3 tacos?
Okay.
Here we go.
Got called out on social media for skimping on some of the ingredients. So they went overboard and now overstuff your orders to the point now that I only get 2 tacos instead of 3.
So how is that good for Chipotle? Because it's good for Paul.
Yes, good for Paul.
But, is it good for them? Like, their top line doesn't grow as much, and they have to put out more in the food.
I think they have this is where Chipotle has a competitive advantage in that they really do pay attention to their consumers and their customers. And they've really focused throughout their entire history as how do I put these families, these people that are coming into these stores, these people that they have a reliable product at a reasonable price. And consumers see value. And if they see value, they show up. And I think that's a competitive advantage that Chipotle has maybe against some of its competitors. And that's what you're seeing, right?
Yep.
They listen, they react,
Yep.
They really react, and everybody feels it. So that's a good consumer products company, and we like those.
Yep, it's good stuff. All right, Dryden, thank you so much for joining us. Dryden Pence, Chief Investment Officer, Pence Wealth Management, based in Newport Beach, California. We've covered that territory before. I'm not buying the whole PIMCO thing out there.
It's pretty out there, isn't it?
It is beautiful. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
That's something.
Yeah.
as long as it lasts, right?
Yeah.
Mudslides,
Falling
fires,
into the ocean. Yeah.
falling things.
It's nice. I mean, someone's got to live there. I'm glad I do.
Exactly.
All right, well, coming up, I'm going to talk to Paul about what he can expect at his next luxury hotel trip.
Nice.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Bunk beds.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah, he's going to be into it. Anyway, this is Bloomberg Intelligence. And much more coming up on a day where the markets are pretty calm. Volume also relatively light. Happy Tuesday. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Lowe's has lowered its full-year guidance, but Drew Redding of Bloomberg Intelligence says the news wasn't all bad.
One of the key investment theses for Lowe's over the last couple of years has been their ability to drive higher operating margin. Their ability to kind of close that gap with Home Depot has really driven the story. And the fact that they're able to kind of sustain their margins in this environment where you have sales down, I think is something that investors will latch onto.
Lowe's now down 1%. Shares of Eli Lilly, they're higher. They're up more than 3%. And that's after a 3-year study found that patients taking its weight loss shot Zepbound were 94% less likely to develop diabetes. We get more from Bloomberg's Madison Muller.
This is definitely the longest study of Zepbound so far. And so we got some early results 72 weeks in that were published in a medical journal from this same study. And what Lilly did was continue to enroll patients with prediabetes for another 2 years.
Now, some more news this morning. This fall, Eli Lilly is going to begin recruiting for trials to test Zepbound with the psoriasis drug to see if that combination boosts effectiveness. Well, Alaska Air and Hawaiian Holdings, they're one step closer to finalizing their nearly $2 billion merger. And this is after the U.S. Justice Department decided against challenging it. Right now, we have Alaska Air. Shares are a little change. Hawaiian Air up about 11%. The Financial Times reporting Couche-Tard bid for Seven & I. That would probably face a U.S. antitrust challenge. Now, sources are saying the combo of that operator of Circle K brand and the Japanese operator of 7-Eleven, well, it could increase prices for consumers consumers and also damage the labor market. Right now we have Couche-Tard. They're up about 0.2% in Canada, 7 in AI, down about 10% in Japan. And Kroger looking to block the FTC's case against his proposed purchase of Albertsons. Kroger right now down about 0.7%. I'm Lisa Mateo. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and finance and economics through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. We also keep you up to date on world and national news. And for that, we go to Denise Pellegrini. Denise?
All right, thank you, Alex. President Joe Biden at the DNC opening night calling for Democrats to rally behind Vice President Kamala Harris.
Selecting Kamala was the very first decision I made when I became our nominee. And it was the best decision I made my whole career. And she'll be a president our children can look up to.
And President Biden speaking there with tears in his eyes. Harris making a surprise appearance.
Let us always remember, when we fight, we win. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Good night, everyone.
And Harris will be speaking again at the finale later this week. Coast Guard says British tech entrepreneur Mike Lynch and Morgan Stanley International Chairman Jonathan Bloomer are among those feared dead on a sunken wreckage of a luxury yacht off the coast of Sicily. The search for the missing is continuing. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has accepted a ceasefire proposal to halt the war in Gaza. Says the next step is for Hamas to say yes. Nomi Bar Yaakov, Associate Fellow at the British think tank Chatham House, though, says looks like Blinken is just tired of all the stalling.
I think the US has lost patience with its allies' behavior, and I think they're going to hopefully inflict a cost, not just leverage, but a cost that Israel won't be able to fathom if they do not.
And Yaakov is Associate Fellow at Chatham House. And here's a possible house for you if you're looking for one. Lakefront house built by a Titanic survivor, listing for the first time in just about a century on Squam Lake up in New Hampshire, also the scene, of course, of On Golden Pond, the movie. Wall Street Journal says the $9.5 million asking price would be the highest ever paid for a home on Squam Lake. Of course, our team leader and senior producer, Bob Bragg, he has a house up there. If you buy that one, guys, you can be his neighbor.
All right. Well, we'll definitely do that, Bob. We're coming for you. All right, Denise, thanks a lot. Denise Pellegrini joining us there. So here's a fantastic piece. First of all, Bloomberg Pursuits is so fun. It's just like, here are all the amazing, cool things that are happening in the luxury market. And one is actually bunk beds.
What?
A la dorm rooms. So apparently this is a new trend at luxury hotels, drawing inspiration from dorm rooms. Remember those like really ugly, kind of smelly, gross dorm rooms that kids use in college? At a time when consumers are looking for better value in hotels or dealing with unprecedented demand, luxury, I should point out, luxury bunk beds have emerged as a win-win solution. This is Alistair Tomlin is a CEO of apparently a hip hostel brand generator, where custom bunks now stretch 3 high in some locations, but they're pretty.
Are these for adults?
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
You can do for all of it. I mean, you can allow families to all room together without having to do like a pull-out couch or get in anyone's way. It maximizes space, so that's a plus. But you have Marriott is also trying this as well, and it's also maybe a form for budget travelers, I guess. Like if you're, instead of renting multiple rooms, you rent one, but I don't know. Does bunk beds say luxe to you? No,
but one thing I like the ad campaign for Airbnb I've seen on TV, which is basically if you're traveling with a family or a big group, you know, you don't want to go to bed at the same time as your kids go to bed because you're sharing a hotel room. Go get an Airbnb, like a house, put the kids to bed, parents can go do it. That was an effective ad campaign.
Here's my problem. I have to make the beds and make my own food. Whereas when I'm away, I don't want to do any of that. And I don't want my husband to do any of that because let's be honest, who actually does the laundry and makes the bed?
He does?
Yeah, not me.
Good for him.
But like he doesn't want to do that, and I don't want him to do that.
Okay, so all right, so that doesn't work for you.
So I need people to take care of me.
You need to be taken care of.
I'd rather do a luxury bunk bed situation, but have someone make my bed.
Well, do they even come in and make, like, does housekeeping even come in every day anymore?
This is a great question. The
Yeah.
answer to that is no.
No.
At least in my recent trips, that has not actually happened. Anyway, much more coming up in the next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence. We'll have more on bunk beds because, you know, why not? We got places where you can go find them, maybe in Massachusetts and the Berkshires. We're also going to break down the market moves as well as look at Lowe's earnings. Are we still looking for that forward demand? This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance. And we're going to have that for you over the next hour. We're going to talk about Lowe's earnings with Drew Redding. He is Bloomberg Intelligence U.S. home building analyst. Plus, the next bid for Paramount. Okay, we'll see if this one actually goes through. Geetha Ranganathan, Bloomberg Intelligence analyst, will be joining us on that. Plus, the broader view on the market as we head towards Jackson Hole with Katrina Simonetti, Senior Vice President and Private Wealth Advisor over at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. And finally, another take on the market here, more focused on AI, Henri Pierre-Jacques. He's co-founder and managing partner at Harlem Capital Partners. We'll be breaking that down with him. But let's kick it all off for you with Charlie Pellet. Here is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Charlie.
All right, I thank you very much. And here's what's going on. Red on the screen right now with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000, all trading lower. Small caps hardest hit, down 1.2% right now. To put that in context, S&P down 13, down 0.2%. The Dow also lower by 0.2%, down 65 points right now. NASDAQ lower by 0.5%. Stocks are struggling to make headway after a rally that drove the market closer to records, wiping out its early August losses. Equities edging lower after briefly rising for a 9th consecutive session in what would be the S&P 500's longest winning streak since 2004. 10-year right now, 3.82%. The 2-year yield, 4.00%. Spot gold, little changed, up 0.6%, $25.19 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude now at 74.24 a barrel, down just about 0.2%. Well, the recent rally has been fueled by bets that the Federal Reserve will signal it is getting closer to cutting rates. Neil Dutta is head of economic research at Renaissance Macro Research.
It's not about whether they go in September anymore. I mean, that debate is over. When you have Neil Kashkari talking to the Wall Street Journal about a September cut, I mean, that debate is basically dead. Now it's really about how quickly they get to neutral and where neutral is.
Neil Dutta of RenMac. Lowe's has lowered its full-year guidance as the frozen housing market keeps consumers on the sidelines for big purchases and renovations. Lowe's shares down now by 1.6%. Rival Home Depot is trading higher by 0.1%. And Alaska Air Group and Hawaiian Holdings are a step closer to finalizing their $1.9 billion merger after the U.S. Justice Department decided against challenging it. Alaska down 0.3%. Hawaiian surging now by 11.7%. Recapping stocks lower. S&P down 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us here. As Charlie was just reporting, a little bit of red on the screen, a little bit of sell-off after 8 days of eight consecutive days of gains. We'll see if that holds here. Let's look under the hood here and see where the action is. We do have the Bailey Lipschultz, who covers the equity markets for Bloomberg News. Bailey.
Yeah, so Charlie's taking the negative view with the stocks that are down. I'm going to call out some stocks that are outperforming this morning, starting with Amer Sports, ticker AS. This company went public earlier this year, debuted back in February, was the worst performing company to IPO and raise more than $1 billion since 2021, but right now up 12.5%, beating expectations. They're the maker of Arc'teryx outdoor apparel, Wilson tennis rackets, really have such a large presence in the greater China area, really called out that strength, something that analysts were applauding, calling out the strength and momentum of the Arc'teryx global growth, as well as kind of broader benefits in terms of consumer discretionary spending more broadly, athletic categories standing up in particular, kind of bucking some of the trends that we've seen from maybe, a number of consumer goods companies as well as those with a heavy presence in China. Still only at $13.89, went public at $13. So small potatoes relative to a market that broadly has moved up and to the right.
Just a breaking news for you. I want to just jump in here. Apparently, David Gohl, who's a former Tiger, well, they're called Tiger Cubs. He used to work for hedge fund titan Julian Robertson, and once you graduate and you go on to your own hedge fund, you're called a Tiger Cub. He had Matrix Capital Management for 25 years. He is now shuttering his $11 billion firm and returning client cash. He told clients in a letter that he made the decision to close his hedge fund due to health problems. This is according to a person familiar with the matter. He didn't disclose the nature of his illness, and he co-founded Matrix back in 1999, and now will be shuttering its $11 billion firm. So we'll bring you more updates as we know as they cross. All right, Bailey, another stock you're looking at here is Eli Lilly.
Right now, up more than 3%. This coming after a 3-year study showed long-term benefits for its obesity treatment, Zepbound, saying there was a 94% less likely to develop diabetes in a 3-year study that had more than 1,000 patients participate that were either obese or had pre-diabetes. So another big win for the company, showing that these weight loss drugs can have a pretty profound impact, really either removing diabetes, or we've seen a number of readouts kind of pointing to things like stroke and heart attack. But I do really want to call out, while Eli Lilly's outperforming, two of the worst performing stocks in the S&P 500, Insulet and Dexcom. Insulet down 5.9%, Dexcom down 4.8%. They operate in the diabetes device space, whether Dexcom making those insulin pumps or Insulet who helps kind of run the software. So seeing that still continuing to shake out as it relates to medical devices, as well as these companies that actually make and sell these drugs.
And last up, what do you got?
Medtronic. So people point to medical devices and say maybe they're not that big of a deal. $112 billion company, beating
they're a big deal? Who
expectations.
says that?
Big deal, one of the bigger companies, so bigger than Starbucks, bigger than KKR, maybe not as well known or a household name like those consumer-facing companies, but beating expectations. Citi calling their first quarter results and guidance raise a nice surprise. This is stock right now up 3%, still only really trading at the highest level since late March. So obviously devices haven't caught on to the AI wave, but beating expectations, really showing strength across a number of its business divisions.
All right, Bailey. And by the way, he does have a suit coat on.
Suit coat on.
Sport coat.
Okay, so just saying, like, he did, like, change his outfit, which we appreciate.
I might wear the vest tomorrow. I don't know if I'll be on, but I might wear a vest tomorrow.
Okay, well, you know, we're obviously keeping track, which definitely feels important.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, coming up. Oh, no, now we're going to talk about it. Let's talk about Lowe's. So we got the Home Depot numbers right, and that was more like, we're going to get deferred business later on as mortgage rates comes down. Is it necessarily the same thing with Lowe's? Drew Redding, Bloomberg Intelligence U.S. home building analyst, is joining us on that. I'm taking a look at the stock right now, and it is down by about 1.8%. It tried to make a run for the green, and then it just couldn't hold on to it. Drew, what were some of your takeaways from the quarter?
Well, thanks for having me. So same-store sales missed. They're down 5%. They cut their full-year guidance. They're now expecting a decline of 3.5% to 4% from 2 to 3% previously. That being said, it wasn't altogether unexpected. We knew coming into the quarter that traffic was weak, particularly at Lowe's compared to Home Depot. We saw it in the retail sales data. We know that, of course, since this is a retailer, there was a weather impact. So I think, from a sales perspective, things were kind of as expected. I think the encouraging thing to point out is that the company was able to hold their margins at a pretty healthy level due to the fact that they're starting to claw back some costs from their suppliers. They have a bunch of internal initiatives around merchandising and their supply chain. So I think, it's kind of a balancing act between, yes, we're still in a rough demand environment, but encouraging that they're able, to hold profitability in a down market.
Just looking at the stock here, Drew, year-to-date, Lowe's is up about 7.5%, Home Depot up about 5%, both trailing the market. What do investors need to see to be a catalyst for these names?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, as you would expect, all of the names tangential to housing, home improvement, whether it's the builders, are all going to trade in sympathy with what's happening with mortgage rates, the 10-year yield, and what the Fed has to say. So that has a lot to do with it. I think in terms of the operational performance of these two companies, we need to get a better grasp of when consumers are going to kind of turn the page, when housing's going to turn the page. And I think there's just still a lot of uncertainty out there. Consumers continue to grapple with the cumulative impact of inflation. Rates are still high. We're still battling with kind of a give back after all the demand we saw during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that in personal consumption, where you're seeing an ongoing shift to services from goods. So what you really want to see is the housing market start to turn. And I think, as we get into the early part of next year, if rates come in a little bit into that low 6% range, I do think we'll start to make a little bit of progress, but not expecting, any type of massive rebound, because you still have a whole lot of homeowners out there with rates below 4%.
With that in mind, who's best poised to take advantage of when things get better? Is it Lowe's? Is it Home Depot? I'm just looking at the stocks on a normalized basis in the last, 6 months. Lowe's has done a pretty solid job in the last 2 months of outperforming.
Yeah, so Lowe's has done well. They've been a turnaround story, and their ability to close the margin gap with Home Depot has really been something that investors have latched onto. When we look ahead, we think that both retailers, we think it's a very fragmented market, despite, you may think of the duopolistic nature of the industry. So we think there's room for both of them to capitalize on eventual rebounds in housing. And part of that has to do with the fact that homeowners are sitting on massive amounts of home equity, and we've got the oldest housing stock on record, which we think, as rates come back a little bit, will support big ticket spending. Now, that being said, we do like the professional contractor market a little bit better in the coming years for some of those reasons. And at this point, Home Depot has a little bit more leverage to that market at about 50% of sales, compared to Lowe's at about 25 to 30% of sales.
All right, very good. Drew Redding, thank you so much for that. Drew Redding is a home building analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us from our Princeton offices down via Zoom, and we appreciate that. Let's move over to the media space. Paramount, kind of back in play, I guess. Edgar Bronfman, the Siemens, the Seagram's company back in the day, Universal Music Group, all that kind of stuff. He's formally submitted a $4.3 billion bid for take control of Paramount Global and squash an existing offer from Skydance Media, and that's according to a person familiar with the proposal. I guess that's kind of real. I don't know. The stock's not reacting at all. Let's check in with Geetha Ranganathan. She covers all the media companies for Bloomberg Intelligence, also down there in Princeton. Geetha, Edgar Bronfman, he's a real player, but is he a credible bidder for this company?
Yeah, Paul. He actually has matched some parts of that Skydance bid. So, you have the national amusements piece. Skydance had offered $2.4 billion for national amusements, and that's exactly what Bronfman has matched. He's also injecting about $1.5 billion to pay down debt and to kind of clean up the balance sheet a little bit. So again, those two parts of it, he's matching Skydance. Now, what he's saying is that, Skydance had actually forced Paramount to buy them at a pretty hefty valuation. So paying almost nearly $5 billion for that studio. So basically, he's saying that there is no dilution to the existing, Paramount shareholders with his bid. But the one thing where he kind of does not have an edge versus Skydance is Skydance did offer $4.5 billion to buy out about 50% of the non-Class A shareholders, so the Class B shareholders, and that's where I think the bid is not necessarily superior to Skydance, and that's why we find kind of the stock really a muted reaction in the stock today.
So why is this bid just happening now? I feel like there's been an open season for Paramount for a while. What do you make of the timing here?
It is down to the wire. There's no doubt about it. So tomorrow is the end, Alex, of the go shop period. There was a 45-day go shop period ever since that Skydance Paramount deal was announced. Now, Bloomberg was reporting that if indeed the special committee that is evaluating all of these M&A proposals at Paramount would seriously consider the Bronfman bid, they could actually extend that go shop period by about 2 weeks to almost about September 5th or so. But again, there's no formal word out there. Remember also that that Bronfman will have to pay a $400 million breakup fee if indeed his bid kind of gets accepted. So again, lots of uncertainty here, but I'm not necessarily sure. I mean, at the end of the day, Paul and Alex, there's only one person whose vote really counts, and that's Sherry Redstone. I'm not necessarily convinced that she is going to say yes to this.
Right. Is there any reporting out there? Do we know, Geetha, whether Mr. Bronfman has credible financing lined up for this transaction?
So there has been some reporting suggesting that he has about $5.5 billion lined up. Of that, we know that he's made this $4.3 billion bid. So he has a little bit of extra cash, which he could probably use to sweeten the offer a little bit. But then remember, he's going up against an $8 billion Skydance bid. So apart from that $1.5 billion cash infusion, Skydance also is paying $4.5 billion to kind of buy out existing Paramount shareholders, or at least 50% of the existing Paramount shareholders. And that's something that Bronfman hasn't done so far. So again, kind of a wait and watch.
I hear the whole, like, it's really Sherry Redstone that matters. I totally get that. But that small little slice of voting shareholders also, you know, are somewhat responsible for putting the screws to some of the deals that have been floated in the past. What does this new deal from Bronfman mean for those kind of shareholders? Do they get extra money? Do they get what they might need / want?
So not really clear what the Paramount non-voting shareholders are going to get, which is why I think, you know, there's so much of uncertainty right now, and the stock is not necessarily getting this big boost from this bid. What was clear from the Skydance deal is that they, you know, 50% of those shareholders can basically cash out at $15 a share. Also, I think the Skydance deal had more strategic merit. I mean, you have a player that has some experience in the media space with film and TV production. Now, Edgar Bronfman obviously is a media personality, but has more experience in the music space as opposed to film and TV production. Also, his M&A record, I would say, has been somewhat of a mixed track record. I mean, he did try to acquire Time Inc., didn't really go very well in 2017. So again, we're not really sure what he would necessarily do with the assets. Whereas I think Skydance has outlined a little bit more a clear strategy in terms of what they want to keep, how they want to go about it. They really kind of want to strengthen the theatrical business. They're going to beef up the animation portion of the business. So I think that strategy-wise, I think the Skydance deal is slightly more clearer.
Okay, well, it certainly makes for interesting theater here to watch for Paramount. Geetha Ranganathan, U.S. media analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. We think about this Paramount, and we have Sherry Redstone from National Amusements. She controls the company through her super voting stock. She's indicated that she's willing to do the Skydance deal and signed off on that. So that seems like the way it's going to go, although I think if you're that independent board, you have to, review this transaction proposal.
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Bronfman.
I'm assuming that Geetha has like an Excel spreadsheet, right? That like has all the different things, because I can barely keep track of what's what.
Yes, she does. It's in her head. That's
wow, that's even more impressive.
Yeah.
Paramount stock down 1.8%. Not what you usually see when you get a bid within the market. All right, coming up, Katerina Simonetti will be joining us, Senior Vice President and Private Wealth Advisor of Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. Lots still on the docket, not only Jackson Hole on Friday, but preliminary revisions for labor data also coming out tomorrow. Have we been overestimating the strength of the job market? And if we have, what does it actually look like? We'll kind of break all of that down within the market as stocks turn a bit lower here on this Tuesday. This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Equities are edging lower, and right now we're trading very close to session lows. S&P down 11, a drop now of 0.2%. The S&P at 55.97, falling back below 5,600. Dow Industrials down 91, decline there of 0.2%, while NASDAQ is down 63 points. That is a drop of 0.4%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares down now by 1.1%. A 10-year 3.82%. The 2-year 4.01%. Gold now up $3.50 the ounce to $25.07. Was trading at a record earlier today. We've got an ounce of gold up by 0.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 0.7%, $73.82 for a barrel of WTI. Netflix shares up 1.4%. Netflix extending its rally for a 6th session to hit a record as the company's changes to its streaming platform rekindle subscriber and sales growth. Again, Netflix shares, they're up now by 1.4%. Again, recapping here, S&P 500 index down 12, a drop of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pelleton, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney. We are live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you can find us. Talk about some volatility. You know, 2 weeks ago, Monday, we had a VIX that surged above 60. I think we got about 65 intraday. The VIX right now for Tom Keene is at 15.4. What a move there. What's a money manager, what's an investor to do with that kind of volatility? Katerina Simoneni, she joins us. She's a senior vice president, private wealth advisor for Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. So, Katerina, talk to us. What kind of conversations have you had with your clients over the last couple of weeks as they, dealt with that volatility from a couple of weeks ago to, boy, we're right back where we started, it seems like.
Paul and Alex, thank you for having me on. You are 100% right. This definitely is not a lazy summer. Investors are concerned. The questions that we get range from how sustainable is this rally or how long the market decline is going to last, because we see these fluctuations that are making investors very nervous. And one thing we know for sure is this volatility is here to stay. If we look back historically at these stretches leading to presidential elections, they usually are known for this heightened volatility. And what we tell our clients is really to expect it, to be prepared for it, to take advantage of the dips in the market when it makes sense, to rebalance portfolio, to stay on the quality side, and definitely avoid making any type of portfolio changes based on what they think the outcome of the election might be, because, as we all know, there might be surprises, so we have the roadmap for either outcome, but we are going to start implementing it after we have clarity on the outcome.
Where would you buy market on dips right now, and where would you be selling any rip?
Alex, what we see right now is disproportionate overexposure to technology in many portfolios. And we love technology. It is definitely here to stay, but this is where, sometimes it's skewed and off balance. And what we recommend to do is go back and rebalance and buy on dips into the sectors like financials, industrials, consumer staples, healthcare, energy, and just to make sure that, we have this strategically positioned portfolio, especially if we add the stocks or emphasize the stocks that pay dividends. Now, in addition to growth, we also have that income component that is going to help investors get through this turbulent, highly volatile time.
How about in the bond market, Katerina? How are you telling your clients to be positioned here? Should they just go take a 2-year treasury and get 4%, or maybe take some credit risk?
Well, Paul, this is where we have to make some tough decisions. We know that the interest rate cuts on the horizon, and whether we are going to get a 1/4 point cut or a 1/2 point cut, we know the rates are coming down, and towards the end of the year, they're going to get most likely lower than where they are today. So investors have a choice. They still have picks of the higher rates. When we look back, at last 20, 25 years. You know, I became financial advisor in 99, and this is the first time in my entire career I'm seeing rates at these levels. So take your pick. There are opportunities in high yield, there are opportunities in high quality investment grade corporates. You know, there are still, you know, some buys that we can find in municipals. We don't recommend going out on the far side of the yield curve. You know, we are, you know, really trying to stay moderate in the middle, but we don't want to go too short either, because we're going to run out of rates and then, you know, most likely default into much lower yields.
But in the corporate credit market, I was reading an article today that talked about how there is so much demand for precisely the scenario that you laid out, that you have to just go down the credit quality to get yields even at 5%. So that kind of upside that you're used to getting from the corporate bond market really isn't there. So how much risk do you want to be taking on right now?
Well, Alex, there are two sides to look at it. You might need to take on a little bit more risk, but still stay in the investment grade. The other side of it is to look at paying somewhat higher premium. And we're not talking, you know, like 10 years ago when we're paying 10% over par. You know, yes, prices of bonds have moved, but there are still some buying opportunities. And there's still dips, just like in the equity markets. You know, if somebody is looking into building their fixed income portfolio, you know, there has to be diversification, exposure to various asset classes, like high yield, investment grade, municipal, preferreds, you know, and just putting together this well-balanced portfolio and buying it gradually and strategically. But I probably would not wait too long, because once the rates are going to start coming down, you know, that move to higher prices and lower quality is going to continue.
Katerina, how do you position alternative investments for your clients? You know, I'm always surprised that retail investors have an appetite for alternative investments, whether it's hedge funds or private equity or private debt. How do you guys position that?
Well, alternative investments definitely give us an opportunity to access parts of the market that we otherwise cannot. And by doing that, we give ourselves, you know, the access to potentially higher returns, but also alternatives can be used as very effective hedge against the market risk, where we're looking to attain the market-like returns with lower than the market risk. You know, the trade-off here, of course, the lack of liquidity, and not all of them are created equal. Some alternatives they're a little bit more liquid. Private equity investments, for example, are not. You know, so that's the trade-off for investors when they're making a decision to go into this alternative space. We absolutely see opportunities, distressed credit, you know, real estate. There are some, you know, pockets of the market that can be accessed there, but lack of liquidity is something that is a very big consideration for a lot of investors.
Oh yeah, I mean, just check out the last couple weeks. What about small caps? Can you give me the spiel on small caps? It feels like these guys are definitely hitting a binary world. Like you either love them or you hate them.
Well, absolutely. And Alex, not that the history always repeats itself, but when we look back at the past cycles, once the rates are starting to come down, usually we first see the uptick in large caps, but then it's followed by the upticks in small caps. And broader on the economic level, you know, we have the higher interest rate environment, which is affecting consumer confidence. And also it is affecting profitability of the companies. And, you know, on one side, we're happy that inflation is coming down. On the other side, this is where, you know, the profit margins are being squeezed as well, more so for the small caps than for the large caps. But at the same time, it might be a delayed reaction, but we absolutely are positioning small caps in the portfolio. The returns that we have seen recently are somewhat of a surprise, because for us is more of a long play. You know, we're looking at the longer time horizon for that position.
Hey, Katerina, we're just finishing up on earnings seasons. What's been your takeaway for earnings so far?
Well, we've seen, you know, pretty good earnings so far, you know, in the year, which was almost a pleasant surprise. You know, they were better than expected. Our outlook for the remainder of the year is quite as optimistic, as we see earnings being affected by consumer confidence, by higher rate, by lack of liquidity, and also by just general economic slowdown. And our base scenario is still that soft landing scenario that is going to affect some parts of the market and some parts of the economy. But we see the earnings being not quite as good as we saw earlier in the year. And the most important piece of data for us are these forward-looking estimates as companies are posting their earnings, for us to really see how well they're positioned in the market. And that's why in this particular time, we favor individual stock investing versus index investing, where we can specifically focus on valuations, on market positioning, and on the forward-looking outlook in earnings.
Before we let you go, Jackson Hole, what are you looking for?
Oh, who knows?
Who knows? No, that's a great answer.
It is really just so difficult to pinpoint and exactly exact data that should come out of it for us to to build the roadmap. But we're looking for just a little bit of positivity to give investors some good news during this time of market volatility prior to the election.
Right. So like slowing economy, but not like a slump economy, like that kind of idea.
That's exactly right. Anything that leads us to soft landing, is good enough for us.
All right. Well, appreciate it. Thank you so much, Katerina Simonetti, joining us, Senior Vice President, Private Wealth Advisor of Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. I feel like the Jackson Hole conversation would have been really different like 3 weeks ago, like if it was right after that jobs number. And I wonder if Powell winds up changing or talk about the market reaction in relation to jobs. Like, I wonder how he talks about that if he does.
Because again, 2 weeks ago Monday, there was, particularly in the morning session, a real sense of panic.
Exactly.
Panic in the marketplace. We stabilized kind of midday, kind of rallied a little bit towards the end of that day, and then ever since then, been kind of moving up and to the right.
And you forgot that Friday because you were on the beach, but yeah.
Yes.
All right, coming up, Henri Pierre Jacques will be joining us, Harlem Capital Partners, co-founding managing partner. And we have Denise Pellegrini with World National News. Denise.
All right, thank you, Alex. And watch for speeches tonight at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago from Barack and Michelle Obama. President Biden speaking last night, promising to step aside and let Vice President Kamala Harris move forward with her campaign as he looks at his own accomplishments.
I've got 5 months left in my presidency. I've got a lot to do. I intend to get it done.
And Biden at times tearful during that speech. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the Middle East. He says Israel has accepted a ceasefire proposal inviting Hamas and Gaza. Bloomberg Abu Omar says Blinken is indicating, though, the ball is now in Hamas court.
We know that the mediators have conveyed Israel's demands to Hamas. So it's now really up to Hamas, what Hamas decides, and whether they do, in fact, agree to the terms of this latest agreement.
Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar there. Ukrainian President Zelensky urging allies to lift restrictions on use of their weapons to strike inside Russia, pointing to success of Ukraine's recent incursion into Russia. Bloomberg's Tony Halpin says it's a major sales pitch by Ukraine.
They wanted to demonstrate, first of all, that they could effectively, by going on attack, improve their defense, but also to demonstrate to the wider world that, as he called it, the illusions about Russia's red lines were being exposed.
Bloomberg's Tony Halpin there. And we have some major headlines in higher education. Vanderbilt University is planning a $520 million campus along the Palm Beach elite area. That's as wealthy transplants seek access to elite education. This would be some 1,000 students, more than 100 faculty there at Vanderbilt University's Florida branch. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The stock rally taking a breather today, holding near records, but still red on the screen. With the S&P down 11 right now, that is a drop of 0.2%. We have got the Dow down 105, down now by 0.3%. Nasdaq lower by 53, a decline of 0.3%. 10-year yield at 3.82% with a 2-year 4.00%. And we have got shares of Lowe's after earnings down now by 0.7%. Rival Home Depot up by about 0.4%. Spot gold up 0.4%, $25.13 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude just about flat on the day. WTI down 2 cents now, $74.35 a barrel. The Labor Department will be issuing revisions to its monthly payrolls report tomorrow, and the data could be rattling. With that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The numbers could be far less robust than initially estimated, suggesting the Federal Reserve is falling farther behind the curve on trimming interest rates. Bloomberg Economics sees a downward revision of about 800,000 jobs to the government's payroll tally from April 2023 to March 2024. Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo peg it at 600,000 fewer jobs. Such figures could shape the tone of Fed Chair Jerome Powell's speech at this week's Jackson Hole Economic Conference. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Kroger is tapping the U.S. investment-grade market today to help fund its acquisition of fellow grocer Albertsons in what could be one of the biggest corporate bond deals of the year. Kroger shares are down 1% today. Albertsons down by 0.8%. Again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We cover all the top news in business, economic, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. For now, though, we're going to go to Miami, Florida, because, you know, why not? We're going to speak to Henri Pierre-Jacques. He's co-founder and managing partner at Harlem Capital Partners. He joins us from Miami, Florida. Now, Harlem Capital Partners was founded back in 2015. It's a venture capital firm based in New York, and it prefers to make investments in things like AI, consumer technology, e-commerce, enterprise, human resource technology, all the stuff that we talk about every single day. Henri Pierre, walk me through kind of how you guys think of the AI landscape right now, the good investments and the risky investments.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of hype around AI. I mean, I think the way that we think about it generally is we want to invest in AI companies that don't touch anything close to the large incumbents, such as Apple, Microsoft, ChatGPT. And so we're really focused on vertical AI applications. And so some of our investments have been in super niche fields like accounting, AI services, insurance broker AI services. And so we're really trying to not touch the consumer AI marketplace. So we think distribution largely will win there for the large players.
So, Henri, we're such in the early innings of AI. A lot of people don't even know what it is, can't really articulate what it is, how it's used, what the applications
are.
You,
Paul?
Yeah, I'm thinking me. I'm speaking my own book here. How are you guys approaching AI right here? Because it feels to me like AI today is what we were calling big data 5 years ago. And 10 years ago, we were just calling tech. So I'm not sure what it is. How are you guys approaching it from an investment perspective?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, AI has been around for a decade plus. I think what this wave has seen is generative AI, which is more of the image and tool and video creation, and people are kind of bucketing that for all of AI. I mean, largely for a lot of the companies we invest in, like they're really just enterprise software companies that are using AI in the background. Ultimately, you know, right now there are more CFOs and CTOs who are getting AI budget spends. And so if the company says AI, then their company will allow them to spend more. But at the end of the day, in the next 3 to 5 years, like the customer only cares about how you're solving their problem, right? We've gone through the similar way for Web3 and blockchain. If you're solving my problem on Web2 versus blockchain versus AI, ultimately I don't really care, right? But there are these cycles where you'll see spend get budgeted, and that's why you're seeing a big pullback for a lot of the SaaS public companies, because the software spend's getting drive to the AI spend. But in 3 to 5 years, you know, maybe even shorter, that word won't be where spend is going. It's ultimately, are you solving the problem that the customer has? And so we're less focused on the technology and more about what problem are you solving. If you're using AI versus software, doesn't really matter in the day, but you will get these short-term cycles where people will have spend for certain, technologies because it's hot in the market.
Can you give me some examples of some of your recent investments in AI, like the companies and sort of why them? But dumb it down for me, for sure.
Yeah, so one that I did, it's called Test Party. So basically what they do is they help websites be ADA compliant. And so a lot of people are either deaf or blind or have blurry vision. And there's actually like federal laws that require companies to have websites that are accessible to them, right? And traditionally speaking, people are going through this, either you're paying somebody in India or it's very manual, right? And now we can use AI to actually go through and scrub these sites and tell you, hey, these parts of your sites are broken. Here's the code that can do to fix it. And so you're ADA compliant, and billions of dollars a year, you'll see lawsuits where people are getting sued because their websites aren't compliant. And so this is a tool. This has been these companies have been around, but they largely were consulting services before. But now it's, instead of having to pay people to do this, you can actually use technology to help, particularly e-commerce websites, be more accessible to people who maybe not have perfect vision or perfect hearing.
Henry, what's a typical deal size? Or I guess what's a typical investment look like for you guys? Maybe in terms of size. How early do you guys like to get into these companies? What's something in your sweet spot?
I mean, we're super early. So I mean, our bread and butter is kind of pre-seed, seed. So I would say typically these companies are between 0 and $1 million of revenue. Our sweet spot check is a $1.5 to $3 million check, usually for 10 to 15% ownership. So we're really early. I would say half our companies were pre-revenue, half our companies were post-revenue. But ultimately, the stage that we're at, we're backing the founders. But sometimes there are businesses and customers, but sometimes there's no product or no customers yet, and we're really just making a bet on the founder to kind of, go and tackle their vision.
Oh my God, that gives me so much anxiety just hearing about that.
Well, what's a success ratio?
My wife says the same.
for someone like you at Harlem Capital Partners, what's a typical success ratio? Like, you've started this in 2015, we're 9-10 years into it. So how's that run for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, so for context, we started as an angel syndicate. So for 3 to 4 years, we were investing our own money into companies. And then we actually raised a fund for Harlem Capital 5 years ago. So we're on our second fund now. So really 5 years into the journey of having institutional capital. Typical, I can give you we're early in the cycle, but we have kind of a 40% Series A conversion. I would say that's really the target for a seed stage fund is how many of your companies get to the Series A. Because from there, you typically see a 60% conversion to the Series B, Series C, et cetera, and beyond. So that's the near-term measurement that we're focused on. But long-term, yeah, it's really hard. Obviously, early-stage venture, 3% of startups become unicorns, and it's the law of outliers, right? And so typically, if you invest in 30 companies, 1 to 2 companies will drive your returns, and that's ultimately what you're fighting for. And the other 28 will be, call it 0 to 5X's, but the one winner is the one that kind of drives your returns. So
That's
it's
pretty
not
amazing.
it's stressful.
Yeah, I mean,
That
hey,
is not
more
my risk
power to
profile.
you. No, this is definitely not my risk profile. I need a steady job. I need the whole thing. Before we let you go, we have a minute left here. Talk about some recent investments in, say, vertical software.
Yeah, so I have a company called Finteri. So it's a reconciliation platform for insurance brokers. So oftentimes insurance companies are kind of outsourcing who they're using for the sales process. You have 10 different brokers. They're getting paid differently, different timetables. And so now you can use AI to actually it's vertical software, but you can use vertical software or AI to help those companies actually manage the process of paying all those brokers. Traditionally speaking, those have been done in Excel files, Word documents. And so we invest in this company pre-revenue. They've grown 10X in the last 9 months. They're growing really quickly. And so what we're seeing for vertical software is a lot of these companies are looking for very specific problems because everybody has been buying software for the past 10 to 12 years. So nobody really no longer needs this broad solution because Microsoft or Salesforce or whoever is kind of solving that. But if you have a very specific problem, I'm willing to pay for the software. But people aren't generally buying horizontal software anymore because that's kind of been done. There's already a lot of incumbents who are solving massive problems versus this very specific problem that a company has.
Hey, Henri, this has been a real pleasure. I definitely want to hear more about how all of this continues to unfold for you. Henri Pierre-Jacques, co-founder and managing partner at Harlem Capital Partners, joining us from Miami, Florida. We'll have much more coming up on the market, but also, can you actually buy affordable housing in the United States, in New York City? you may be able to. We'll get that for you. Plus, much more coming up on markets. A little bit heavy on this Tuesday.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Lowe's shares after earnings trading lower now by 0.7%. Lowe's did lower its full-year guidance as the frozen housing market keeps consumers on the sidelines for big purchases and renovations, including do-it-yourself projects. Lowe's said it cut its forecast because consumers are spending less than expected on projects as the macroeconomic environment remains challenging. Again, Lowe's down by 0.7%. Rival Home Depot today up 0.5%. Among the retail names reporting tomorrow, TJ Maxx. Joanne Feeney is a partner at Advisors Capital Management.
We like to look for the areas which are providing bargains for consumers because their budgets are being constrained. They want to find those bargains. TJ Maxx is one. McDonald's, while it's having some sort of global issues, is still a really solid company and is appealing to a lot of consumers. And they're making moves now to become more price, attractive to some segment of the consumer population. So look for companies that offer bargains because we think with tightening budget constraints, that's where consumers are going to have to go.
Joanne Feeney of Advisors Capital. TJX trading higher right now, up 0.2%. She mentioned McDonald's. McDonald's shares up by just under 0.1%. The president of the United Auto Workers Union spent part of the Democratic National Convention address accusing Stellantis of trying to renege on a contract that ended a 6-week strike last fall as the union threatens another national walkout. Shares of Stellantis, they are trading higher today. We've got Stellantis right now up by about 0.3%. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from our Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. Also check us out on YouTube as well. Let's get you caught up now with world and national news. And for that, we go to Denise Pellegrini. Denise?
Alex, watch for Barack and Michelle Obama to speak tonight at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. President Biden at the opening night last night calling for Democrats to rally behind Vice President Kamala Harris.
Selecting Kamala was the very first decision I made when I became our nominee. And it was the best decision I made my whole career. And she'll be a president our children can look up to.
And the president speaking there with tears in his eyes. Harris made a surprise appearance yesterday as well.
Let us always remember, when we fight, we win. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Good night, everyone.
And Harris will be speaking again at the finale later this week. The Coast Guard says British tech entrepreneur Mike Lynch and Morgan Stanley International Chairman Jonathan Bloomer are among those feared dead on sunken wreckage of a luxury yacht off the coast of Sicily. The search for the missing people is continuing. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Israel's prime minister has accepted a ceasefire proposal to halt the war in Gaza. The next step, he says, is for Hamas to say yes. Nomi Bar Yaakov, associate fellow at the British think tank Chatham House, says, though, it looks like Blinken is really getting tired of all the stalling.
I think the US has lost patience with its allies' behavior. And I think they're going to hopefully inflict a cost, not just leverage, but a cost that Israel won't be able to fathom if they do not.
And Yaakov of Chatham House there. And here comes Vanderbilt University South. The university asking local Florida officials to approve a proposal to build a $520 million campus in the wealthy Palm Beach area with 1,000 students, more than 100 faculty. The site in West Palm Beach previously targeted by the University of Florida for a similar project, but that project failed. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it at Bloomberg News Now. I'm Denise Pellegrini. This is Bloomberg. Alex, Paul, back over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Denise. Really appreciate it. So here's a great one. Thank you, Tim Senovic, for showing this. Apparently, New York City is planning to sell apartments on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, just 2 blocks from Central Park, for as low as, you ready?
Yeah.
$173,000. And a little bit $801. So I get a little bit of $800.
How are they doing that? Oh, these would be subsidized by the city. I see. I get you. Okay.
17 studio and 1-bedroom units in the pre-war walk-up building come with hardwood floors, air conditioning, and will be sold via a lottery to New Yorkers making less than 120% of the area's median income and who have no more than about $280,000 worth of assets. More than 10,000 people have already applied ahead of the August 27th deadline.
Yeah, and this overwhelming demand underscores the city's housing crisis, with the biggest shortage in over 5 decades, amid sky-high rents and an influx of immigrants that's filled city shelters. The raffles, run by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, placed a record 9,550 households into affordable units in the past fiscal year.
And apparently, so it's near the Natural History Museum, and it's a few doors down from, get this, the Orleans, where a 4-bedroom condo recently priced at $7.8 million. I mean, there are cheaper options, like a studio for $500,000, but nonetheless, like, this is great. I don't know who makes the profit, but okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, my daughter lives in the greater New York City area, and the frustration...
Oh, yeah.
Connection they only do annual leases. So the kids are in a constant stage of looking for apartments. No sooner are you in your apartment than you have to assume that when your lease is up, they're going to jack up the rent, and you got to find some place. And so these kids are in a constant state of looking for apartments. When I lived here, we had 2 or 3 year leases.
Yeah,
well, I don't know what happened.
Well, and here with the issue about buying is that then you actually get wealth, like you accumulate wealth, because if you buy it for $178,000, you're going to sell it. Let's just call it for $300,000, and I'm sort of underestimating here. And then that's how you get your wealth. Like that's how you get your pot. I mean, my husband bought an apartment in a building that went rent stabilized to co-op. Like that's the dream, right? Other than that, forget it. You've been 1-year leases.
Tough.
Yeah.
Especially for young folks.
Exactly. All right. I'm a young folk. All right. That wraps it up for me and Paul. Paul will be back here tomorrow. I am off. He will take you through a balance of power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons from Chicago, Illinois.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
From the Democratic National Convention in Chicago to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
Thank you. I love you.
Day two of the convention. Delegates recovering from a very late night in that hall as Joe Biden delivered his address that went late, described as emotional. He did wipe a tear during a very long standing ovation. Kaylee, that was the moment that many in this administration had been waiting for, and of course tease up Kamala Harris for her acceptance speech on Thursday night.
Yeah, and of course, before we can get there, there's more speakers lined up this evening. We'll be hearing from both Obamas, former President Barack Obama, and his wife, the former First Lady Michelle Obama, and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, will be speaking here in Chicago at the United Center this evening. But at the same time, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will actually not even be in the state of Illinois. They're heading to Milwaukee to Wisconsin and the Pfizer Forum, which of course was the scene of the Republican National Convention last month.
Yeah, a little interesting bit of programming. They are spending every night in Chicago, but leaving town for this one, day two, with the theme, A Bold Vision for America's Future, as the Democratic Party tries to deliver the message that they're turning the page.
Yeah, and the question is, to what extent will they have success doing so in this packed convention week? Bloomberg's Hadriana Lowenkron is here with us in Chicago, covering it all along with our wonderful team of Bloomberg reporters, and she's joining us now here on set. So obviously there is a lot of pomp and circumstance surrounding this. We will see that again this evening. What we will not see is Harris and Walz in the box where they were last night. Can you just walk us through the thinking of the campaign here to not be present on night two of the convention when so many members of the party are taking the floor to speak?
Right, it does seem a little odd, especially when you compare things to, I was in the RNC in Milwaukee and Trump was there pretty much the whole week. But again, I think this really goes to the point where the Harris campaign really feels they are the underdog. They're not taking anything for granted. And so yes, they are out campaigning. They were in Pennsylvania before the convention began. They're heading Milwaukee, they're hitting the swing states. And I think that also comes as, important to note that this comes as Trump will be doing a lot of counter programming this week, hitting several swing states and making a visit to the border in Arizona. So again, the Trump campaign is trying to make that contrast. So the Harris campaign is still saying here, we're traveling, we're hitting the swing states, we're not taking our voters for granted.
Well, it is also fair to say that in the past, you might not see the nominee until the final night of the convention, but we'll see how this plays out this evening. I do want to ask you about Joe Biden last night, though. There's been a lot of talk about run of show, the fact that he didn't get on TV sets on the East Coast or computer screens until 11:30 at night. That was an interesting moment for him, a very emotional one. How come it went so late?
Well, that's a great question. We know that a lot of the speeches did run pretty long. We know that a lot of it also came from the fans in the arena. I mean, Hillary Clinton, minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes before they were speaking, before she was set to speak, just roaring applause. And so the crowd was very energized. We also know that there were protests out kind of during the events that took place earlier on in the evening. We know that that was kind of cited as one of the reasons for a bit of the delays. They did have to move some things around. And, people were nervous. Biden has tended to not do as well the later in the evening events have taken place. We know this is reminiscent of the late night debate. But, he was able to speak for nearly an hour. I think he did what he needed to do. He was teary. I mean, this is a very bittersweet moment for him. It's very non-traditional, passing the reins over to Harris. And he spoke a bit about his record, but he also did say he was ready to be, I think the quote was, he's ready to be the best volunteer for the Harris-Walz campaign. And, to your point earlier about the weird kind of Harris dynamic, Harris did actually make a surprise appearance on Tuesday, on Monday, and we are, again, excited. Everyone is ready to see her on Thursday to formally accept the nomination.
Well, when we think about Harris being in that room with President Biden speaking last night, someone who wasn't physically in the room, but very much it felt like the center point of the majority of the speeches is the former President Donald Trump. Joe Biden mentioned him by name probably dozens of times, realistically. Trump himself is counter-programming this convention, too. He's going to be in Michigan today. What is the Trump campaign strategy as Democrats try to put on the show of unity Republicans were trying to put on in Milwaukee last month?
They're really trying to get Harris to do some more unscripted settings. We know that everyone speaking throughout the convention has a teleprompter. This is something that the Trump campaign is really hoping to kind of goad Harris into taking more questions from reporters, doing a sit-down interview, which she said she would do at the end of the month. In addition to Trump himself counter-programming throughout the week, he has surrogates who are here in Chicago every day holding a press conference where they themselves are taking questions. I was there on Monday. And I think the important kind of contrast here is, again, they're trying to say they acknowledge the polling, that there has been a bump in enthusiasm. The campaign is saying they expected that. They think that a plateau has been reached. And now they're thinking the more that voters will get a chance to see Harris, the more that enthusiasm will wane. And they will start to, the Trump campaign will start to see those numbers go up. So they're hoping that the more opportunities there are for Harris to speak to the press, maybe trip up when discussing policy, that'll be the place where the Trump campaign then can jump in and make up some ground.
We're going to be hearing from Donald Trump in Howell, Michigan, a little bit later on today, talking about crime. This is one of the issues, including the economy, a few others, the border, that poll really well for Republicans. This is a message that's been sticking here in a place like Chicago. Are you hearing about that from Democrats? Are they acknowledging this?
Yes, excellent question. I mean, crime is definitely something that the Trump campaign is working. They're actually using it as a way to say this is their way to get women voters as well, which we know they are not having as much luck with compared to the Harris campaign. When asked just at the press conference the other day about appealing to women voters, they pointed to crime and they're focused on that, saying, well, women want to feel safe, they want a secure border. But, you know, in contrast, the Biden-Harris campaign, or sorry, the Harris-Walz campaign now, but also the Biden-Harris administration has also been pointing to the border. They've been, their main thing, and Biden, I think, mentioned it Monday night, was that they had this border bill, this bipartisan border bill, and that Trump then called up senators, and that was why the border bill was killed. So Biden pointed to that. The Democrats have been, pointing to that. So that's kind of their, counter messaging on the border.
All right, Bloomberg's Adriana Lowenkron, very busy here in Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Now, as Adriana talks about some of the messaging from President Biden last night, and also is talking about women in particular, that is something that we heard from the incumbent president on the issue of diversity, not just for women, but all kinds of demographics across America.
In America, where the fundamental creed of this nation, that all of us are created equal, is still very much alive. And a broad coalition of Americans joined with me. 81 million voters voted for us. More than any time in all of history. Because of all of you in this room and others, we came together in 2020 to save democracy. As your president, I've been determined to keep America moving forward, not going back. To stand against hate and violence in all its forms, to be a nation where we not only live with them, but thrive on diversity, demonizing no one, leaving no one behind, and becoming the nation that we profess to be.
For more on that message and this convention as a whole, we're joined now by Congresswoman Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, the House Minority Whip. She's here with us in our studios in Chicago. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Of course, we heard the president last night referring to diversity, talking, as we heard many, about the big tent in the Democratic Party. It is literally your job in the House to bring all those diverse forces together to be singing the same song. Can you just walk us through what it was like within the membership of the House to line everybody up behind what is now the Harris campaign, not the Biden campaign?
I have to say, out of all the tasks I've had as whip in the House for the Democratic Party, this was perhaps the easiest. People immediately gravitated to Kamala Harris and saw her as our standard bearer for all the things that we have worked on with her as vice president and her vision for the future. So whether that's lowering costs, whether it is growing the middle class, protecting our fundamental freedoms like reproductive freedom, Kamala Harris has been our partner, and that was truly just almost instantaneous, that movement from President Joe Biden to her candidacy, because we knew she was the candidate for the moment.
It's a very delicate thing we're witnessing, though, and witnessed last night to see Joe Biden talking to the delegates there. I know it went very late into the evening, but the people in the room weren't concerned about the time. Obviously, it had a rally feel to it, but there was a bittersweet, emotional feel to this. It happened so fast, Congresswoman. How does he feel when you talk to him? What kind of emotions was he experiencing?
You know, I think we saw it on display, a true pride, and what has always been a hallmark for Joe Biden is his gratitude to be able to serve. What an incredible quality in a politician and a leader. And it is what has made him a transformative president. That idea that there is a bigger calling here, that the American people are always at the center of his work, and it's at the center of this extremely patriotic decision. And so last night, he deserved every minute of those accolades from the crowd, that genuine affection for him, respect for the job and his service. And we look across the aisle at Donald Trump, and you see the exact opposite.
He says Democrats staged a coup.
It's a 180 because he cannot fathom giving up power for something bigger than himself. That is where Donald Trump is. It is always about how he will benefit, not how the American people will, not how the Democratic Party that is based on values will. So I'm sure he is wrestling with this moment, calling it a coup because he cannot understand it, because he could never do what Joe Biden did.
Well, Joe Biden has suggested his decision wasn't even as much about his ability to defeat Donald Trump, but instead the impact he could have, perhaps detrimentally, on House and Senate races and the ability for other Democrats to win. What has changed for the Democrats' odds of retaking the majority in the House since Harris assumed her role as the Democratic nominee? How many seats realistically do you think you can pick up?
You know, I have always been bullish on the Democrats retaking the House because what we've seen are do nothing at best and real extremism that the American people are rejecting. And so what we're seeing is this incredible energy and momentum that we are going to turn into action. And in real time, that is meaning for our candidates have seen a surge in volunteers of small first-time donors. When you get that $10, $15, $20 donation, that's a vote. That is a vote of confidence.
Does that translate into 10, 15 extra seats in the House, though?
Well, we certainly hope so, but my number as the whip, and I like to keep track of the numbers, is 218. That's our goal, to win that majority and be able to bring the voices of everyday people back into the process. What we have seen from the GOP is this complete focus on their own power, their own civil war that they're engaging in, and the American people feel like they're outside looking in. Well, we've continued to work with the Biden-Harris administration to bring down the cost of health care, cap insulin at $35 a month, take on Big Pharma and say it is time that people be able to afford their life-saving medication. Make those investments in climate change that also are great for the economy. And all of that work was done and brought down our deficit at the same time. These are the kind of investments that we are going to build upon and continue to help families meet the very real challenges they're facing still in this economy with Kamala Harris.
The issue of Israel and its war against Hamas has been obviously a big one in this campaign, in the primary cycle, and it's brought some fissures to the Democratic conference in the House. We've got tens of thousands of protesters here in Chicago that have been part of the story. You've also got a couple dozen delegates who are not committed for this reason. How important, Congresswoman, will it be for the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, to strike a ceasefire deal this week?
You know, it is all hands on deck, and they are working so hard to make sure that we end this war, that we have a ceasefire, that we can bring those hostages home, and that we can surge aid to Palestinian civilians who, through no fault of their own, have suffered horrendously and continue to suffer. So we appreciate that there are protesters here. That's part of the democratic process. We respect their right to be here, and we hope that remains peaceful. But it is the goal of the Democratic Party to bring peace and security not only to Israel, but to the region.
And of course, we know those conversations are ongoing. We'll still wait to hear more from Hamas as to whether or not it will agree. I'm also curious the conversations you're having related to your everyday job in Washington, obviously still on the August recess, but when you come back in September, it's going to be a race against the clock to avoid a government shutdown. Are you in conversations already with leadership and Republican leadership about how that's going to be avoided when you return to Washington in a few weeks? What exactly are you going to have to whip?
You know, I'm so glad you brought that out, because one thing we realized from the very start, when we were in the 15 rounds of Kevin McCarthy trying to become a speaker, that we are in the minority. So we have reached our hand out to them at every turn to say, work with us. Help us prevent shutdowns. Help us get to a budget process that matters. And what we have seen from them is a rejection of that and a move to try and coddle the most extreme members of their extreme party. And so it is really like such a basic fundamental job and responsibility of the House of Representatives to pass our budgets. And they have utterly failed to do that. So once again, it will be Democrats, as we have done repeatedly, who will keep government functioning, who will come to the table, forge a compromise, because we work for the American people. They are working to try and hold their own coalitions together. And that's the fundamental difference. We're seeing it play out around reproductive freedom for women. We're seeing it play out in bringing down the cost of groceries and housing. These issues that I hear about as I not only travel my district, but travel the country. That is what people are worried about. That is what they want to see in Congress. It's why we're going to win the majority back.
Meet us back in Washington so we can continue this conversation, Congresswoman. It's great to see you.
I'd love to.
Thanks for the time today on Bloomberg TV and radio. The House Minority Whip, Congresswoman Catherine Clark, in an important conversation on day 2 of the Democratic National Convention. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons with much more to follow. We're joined by Danny Wirtz, Michael Reinsdorf coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, broadcasting to you live from Chicago, Illinois. Of course, the scene of this week's Democratic National Convention. Night one is in the books, of course, culminating in a late night speech from President Joe Biden. He's now left town, and we're getting ready for night two and speeches from the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and both of the Obamas.
That's right. The DNC says they expect 50,000 people to descend on Chicago this week. And of course, only night two. There's a bit of a festive feeling in the air, right? We have some protesters around, but so far things have run fairly smoothly, if not just a bit late for the Democratic National Convention last night. Joe Biden didn't get on stage till 11:30 or something. I think the ovation went on till about midnight, Kaylee. But why don't we head over to the United Center right now? Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has a closer look at what's happening today. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. We've been following a lot when it comes to commercial real estate here in the city of Chicago. We know that commercial real estate has been lagging in recent years since the pandemic. Vacancies are at record high rates, and some investors are now looking to see if any potential rate cuts in September could help unlock the commercial real estate market. For a sense of what's going on, you two caught up with Andy Glore, the CEO of Sterling Bay, one of those big real estate developers here in the city, for a sense of what needs to happen to spur more investment.
The commercial real estate business has been under a Category 5 storm for a few years now, okay, to say the least. And if you look at the real estate business, there's really, you can only control so many things. I think you need to, lower the cost of capital for people to start making investments back into these urban areas. And let's face it, if we need to get these cities back on track.
Now, one investment is already underway. You can see the United Center over my shoulder. That's at the center of one key revitalization effort in the city. The owners of the NBA Chicago Bulls and the NHL's Blackhawks are pouring in $7 billion for a multi-use development that would revamp this area around the arena in what's being called the 1901 project. It'll bring an estimated $9.5 billion in direct economic impact to the area. This is considered the largest private investment to date in West Chicago. Joe and Kaylee, I know that you're talking with two of the key stakeholders next, and I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Indeed, we are. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with a view at the United Center. Thank you so much. And Tyler is exactly right. We are joined now by Danny Wirtz, Chairman and CEO of the Chicago Blackhawks, alongside Michael Reinsdorf, President and CEO of the Chicago Bulls. They are both here with us on set in Chicago. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having
us. It is a power table.
I'm not so sure about that.
I don't know.
Indeed. Well, obviously, it's a big week for you guys. I'm sure one that has had probably a year or so of preparation leading up to it. Michael, if we could just start with you, talk to us about the decision to host this convention at the United Center and what all has gone into it, and whether or not this is the most lucrative thing you could have done with a building of its size.
Well, I mean, clearly it's not the most lucrative thing we could do because we've shut down our building since the end of our season. So we've had we haven't booked any events for the last couple months. But to us, this was kind of a no-brainer when Governor Pritzker and Mayor Lightfoot came to us. We were on board from the very beginning. We had the convention kind of kicked off, I think, a lot of the redevelopment on the west side in '96. So the United Center was opened up in 1994. This is our 30th year. And the '96 convention was a complete success. And now it's many years later, and we want to do our part of supporting the city of Chicago that we love so much.
Fascinating. I'm really taken by the logistics behind something of this scale. You can throw a concert, you can host a game, but this is on a much larger level. You have 50,000 people attending, and I'm just curious what goes into that type of a transformation.
Tremendous planning, and the good thing is our team kind of at the United Center are used to these, 150 nights a year working games, concerts, etc., big events like all-star games, but this is another level, and I know our team at the United Center kind of like the challenge of really rising to the occasion. And then, of course, it's partnerships. It's partnerships with all the city agencies and all the people that have to make it all work, and it's an impressive experience to go walk through, and just walking through last night and see all the pieces come together to make the event work.
Is it public service, though? Also, Kaylee references the fact that you could be making a lot more money doing something else.
Yeah, I think it's kind of in our DNA to step up and to do the right thing for the city, because when the city does well, we do well as a business, and these conventions are big opportunities to put the spotlight on our great city, to showcase what we do so well, and to bring people and bring business to Chicago.
Well, as we think about the work you're doing in Chicago, obviously you announced a few weeks ago, as Tyler mentioned, the 1901 project. You're investing more than $7 billion to revamp basically the area we're in now, the area that surrounds the United Center. How do you fund that, as we're having a conversation here about money?
Well, we're going to fund it privately. We're lucky because the United Center is kind of the anchor tenant. So we have a chance to redevelop the land, the parking lots. When we opened the building, we had 6,000 parking spaces available. And we didn't want to make it a sea of parking, but what happened was a lot of people bought parking, vacant lots and made additional parking. So we actually became kind of a sea of parking. And now we have this opportunity to reimagine this neighborhood. It's not, Danny and I have talked, this is not an entertainment district that you see in a lot of other cities with their buildings, their arenas and stadiums. This is an opportunity to do something different for the West Side. So it will be privately financed, and we're talking a lot of development, whether we're building a music hall, we're building hotels, affordable housing, open park space. I mean, it's kind of like Chicago's West Side. It's their time. It's our time.
There's a big conversation about crime in this campaign that you hear a lot about, I'm sure. The former president, Donald Trump, has been criticizing Chicago, using crime statistics in some of his speeches, and we have to acknowledge the reality of the matter. But when you consider an investment of that scale and you look at the geography, is it you build it and they will come? Well, the timing is what I'm curious about, considering the backdrop of your investment here when it comes to crime in Chicago.
Well, we have a long-term view. Danny, how long has your family been?
We've been here for almost 100 years, and I can tell you, crime has always been something that we've had to contend with and work with. But we also know that when we invest in the neighborhoods and when you invest in economic development, that is one way to help create opportunities that gets to sort of the root cause of some of the crime issues you see today. So I think Chicago has a history of really rolling up our sleeves and trying to be part of the solution, try to partner, with the public sector to figure out how do we create those opportunities to help, stem some of those problems from violence.
Yeah, you have to understand one thing. When the United Center opened, no one went west of the business district.
Yes, right.
And United Center opened in '94. Mayor Daley wanted to bring the convention to, make up for what happened in '68. '96 convention went off perfectly, and then all the development started happening. I don't think Fulton Market, which is just to the east of us, I don't think that necessarily happens without the United Center kickstarting all of this. So for us, we're not worried about the timing. We think the timing is right now.
Well, the timing for having the public cooperation with investing in things like stadiums, as we've seen evidenced by, say, the Chicago Bears, for example, doesn't seem to be great. There's been a lot of pushback in that. And I know you just said that you're planning to finance this privately, but what do you think about the dynamic surrounding the financing mechanism of these investments into sports facilities, or frankly, the facilities around them? If, as you say, this is about helping to invest economically that could help with things like crime.
Yeah, I think every situation is very different. Wherever you're looking to do your development has different opportunities, and I think it is that partnership, with the public to figure out where that benefit lies. We know in our situation, we own our land. We've owned our land for a long time. We've been part of this community for almost 100 years. So you have a good feel of what the neighborhood needs, how to find those nice trade-offs and those important trade-offs between our commerce and what we need from the community, and then you build it together. And I think other developments are putting that more at the forefront than ever before.
When you consider public-private partnership and just the role that you play in this city, you're no strangers to politics, which is what we talk about every day here on this program. Are politics making it more difficult to do business, or the conduit for your success?
I mean, for us, I think that there seems to be a lot of interest in our development. When we went to the mayor's office, we talked to the people, that surround him, our alderman, Walter Burnett. Everyone seemed to be on board. Like, to me, this was almost like a no-brainer. I mean, you have a group of people that want to spend $7 billion on a
They might
private
want to take
development.
that meeting.
Yeah,
But those relationships are long and important to you.
Of course. I mean, we have, we have friendships going back many, many years. Now we have a new mayor here who just became mayor last year, and we're developing a relationship with him. But like I said earlier, our families go back a long, long time, and we're about Chicago, not about the politics. It's what can we do to make Chicago a better place?
Well, a lot of the politics today, or at least the political issues that seem to be dominating the narrative, certainly we're seeing this week and in this election, surround the economy as well. We've seen such a change in the economy over the last 4 years from the pandemic, which obviously shut down facilities like the United Center for an extended period of time, to this resurgence in demand for that experience economy. People wanted to go to live events like sports games and concerts. Now we're all asking this question of whether or not the softening is finally upon us in the labor market and potentially in consumption as a result. Are you seeing any signs of that in a waning of demand, or is there still demand to go
I think for
do expensive things in person?
For sports and entertainment, I think it seems like every year is bigger than the last year. I think we had a record year for other events outside of our two teams last season. We obviously hear across the board, Lollapalooza had record attendance this year for live music and festivals. So again, I think that desire to be connected, that desire for experience, and people willing to pay for it is still there. So at least in that part of the business, for sure, we see some nice tailwinds. Whereas other parts of the business, we definitely see some of those.
Yeah, I think it's helped that in the music industry changed so much over the years that before putting out albums was where you made the money. Now it's touring. So now you have all these acts. And so every year it seems like we're getting more and more acts. I mean, how many different concerts did we do last year? I
think we're almost 80 different concerts.
I mean, it's kind of crazy. And so now we're building this music hall, which is a 6,000 seat venue, and that's going to get some of the smaller acts. And we don't see a softening right now. I mean,
and especially in markets like Chicago, which seems to be able to absorb a tremendous amount of live events and entertainment.
Sure.
Chicago loves its sports, so we feel pretty good about where we're at here.
But it's an interesting take that you have just broadly beyond even spending on events, sports, and concerts. You don't see a consumer prepared to slow down or more wary about conditions.
I think what we see is that you better make sure that you are delivering a special experience. From the time that someone gets into their car or takes the train or takes the ride sharing to, parking the car, going into the building, getting their food, getting their drinks, we better make sure that it is a top quality experience. And that's some of the biggest challenges we have, because we don't control the traffic. We don't control certain things. We don't control when it's a blizzard in the middle of winter. Probably one of the great things about this DNC is that it's in the summer, right? Not here in the winter.
I have to say the weather right now is certainly preferable to
we ordered it up for you guys. Yeah,
thank you.
I want to ask as well, because something we just saw happen in Washington last year was the purchase of a sports team for a pretty rich valuation in the Commanders. We've seen the valuations seem to go up in general, and I wonder if you think this is something that is sustainable, how you're considering your own valuation for the Blackhawks at this time, if you've been having any conversations with private equity about these kind of things. Can you just shed some light on that, Danny?
I'm fourth generation owner of our family. I think one of the longest contiguous owners of a major sports franchise in all of sports. And for us, it's something we just hold really dear to our family. So we're sort of in a very unique situation from an ownership standpoint, which of course, the interests in these very coveted licenses are driving those values up. So we love the valuation, but it doesn't necessarily change our strategy to continue to hold and develop and grow our family asset for another few generations.
And what about for the Bulls?
For the Bulls, I mean, we're the Chicago Bulls. Why would we want to get out of being part of the Chicago Bulls? I mean, we were probably the first global sports franchise in the world, thanks to Michael Jordan. Right. So for our family and for our investors, our partners, we're not interested in being a seller. Is it nice that the valuations of these teams are going up? Sure, but at the same time, we're not going to realize any of that because the Bulls aren't going anywhere.
Well, we have another big sports deal in Washington, D.C., and that was Ted Leonsis' teams deciding to stay in Washington and a massive deal to kind of rebuild the neighborhood. He talked to us about the challenges of moving buildings, changing spaces that allow people to flow into a new area that they might not be going to otherwise. You're facing something similar here when you've got a river in the way. You've got a couple of things. How do you envision this project in Western Chicago in a way that will actually bring the flow of people to your
So I
events?
actually think the hardest part was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
As Michael said, crossing that threshold to come to the West Side to see an event. And, over 70 years, people got used to coming to the Chicago Stadium, but it didn't offer a lot on the way. Where we're at now, the growth happening on the west side of Chicago is tremendous. Fulton Market is the most explosive neighborhood in the city of Chicago. That's right at our doorstep. The growth of the Illinois Medical District just south of us. So there's momentum here, and there's a lot of other things happening around this development that I think gave us the confidence that the energy is coming and the energy's here.
And the infrastructure's in
and the
place.
infrastructure. And now that's an area where I think the city's very interested in really understanding what the infrastructure needs are to make sure we can continue to bring people here through the various forms of transportation, that we have all the things we need for this to be, a continued vibrant neighborhood.
What a treat to have this much time. Thank you both for being so generous. A great conversation here.
Yeah.
This is why we came to Chicago.
That's right.
Danny Wirtz, Michael Reinsdorf. Great to see both of you, and thank you for being with us. On Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio, we are live from Chicago, day 2 of the Democratic National Convention. We want to make sure we keep up to date on the markets right now. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle has more from New York. Hi, Abigail.
Hi, Joe. Well, it's shaping up to be a bit of a soggy day here for stocks. We've had the S&P 500 going up and down, right now down about 0.25%. Making that interesting is the fact that it is the first down day in 9, so breaking the best winning streak for the S&P 500 going back to 2022 and the longest since November of last year. We have bigger declines for the chip area, down 1.7%. This comes as NVIDIA is down almost about 2%, and then the Russell 2000, those small cap stocks, more domestically based, down 1.2%. Now, I suspect that the NVIDIA weakness has to do with something specific. Overall this week, very macro, of course, the DNC, election 2024, but we also have lots of liquidity concerns on our hands, including the Fed later this week, Jackson Hole, Fed Chairman Jay Powell. But right now, we have something happening with the yen, because, of course, a couple of weeks ago when we had stocks down sharply, we really had a steep correction. It had everything to do with the unwind of the yen carry trade. We're seeing a little bit of that today. It's not being referenced that way because it's not violent in the way that it had been before. But over the last 3 days, we have the dollar yen down more than 2%. That is another way of saying that the haven yen is strengthening, so that cheap money trade, well, it's just not happening. If recent lows were broken, it could really bring another big correction for stocks. We're not seeing that right now, but the fact that you do have the Russell 2000 and NVIDIA underperforming speaks to the idea that some investors really are eyeing this strengthening yen, and maybe a little bit concerned that we could, in fact, see a reprisal or a return of that unwind of the yen carry trade. But of course, it is DNC week and election 2024. Lots of volatility, uncertainty. There's about a 10% betting odds difference between VP Harris and Donald Trump, with VP Harris on top. Relative to the Harris trade and the Trump trade, though, today, each of these trades is lower. Relative to that Harris trade, we're still trying to figure it out, but relative to that economic policy, or the skeleton of it that was revealed last week, $1.7 trillion, capping prices at the grocery store, offering $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. We see weakness for the groceries, so that actually is positive for the Harris trade. It suggests that investors are taking that seriously. On the other hand, home builders lower. And then take a look at DJT, down 2.1%. So the Trump trade certainly not in place, actually below its SPAC opening, Kaylee. So it's interesting to see some of this weakness across the board. And of course, that VIX, it's not really elevated, but around election 2024, and we'll take a look at this next hour, it's closer to an 18, 19, 20 handle, showing that investors do have their eye on the uncertainty coming up in November.
All right, Abigail Doolittle, always with an eye on the VIX and DJT and everything else in financial markets we need to be appraised of. Thank you so much joining us from New York. Meantime, of course, the convention continues here in Chicago, and it'll be interesting to see the tone shift that happens on this evening, night 2, after night 1. It was dedicated to the current president, Joe Biden, by and large, with signs of I Love Joe on the convention floor. Right. He's now out of town, and now it becomes much more about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
That's true. It's a good place to start with the panel here, Kaylee, because it was an important moment, and frankly, not a lot of Americans saw this live. Joe Biden didn't get on stage till 11:30 last night. And as we said, the ovation might have lasted till midnight. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us right now. Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie, of course, political science professor at Iona University. Welcome to day two. Rick, were you getting agita as someone who ran a convention watching this thing go overtime last night?
Yeah, I was on a group chat with a bunch of guys who helped me organize the 2008 convention, and we were all talking by about 9 or 10 o'clock. This thing is really off the rails. It's way late.
What does it mean when you're canceling speakers in prime time?
It's a real embarrassment to the campaign organization, to the program committee of the convention. This thing is supposed to be accounted for. Every second of the schedule is written down, debated, and rehearsed. And the fact that they were off by 45 minutes to an hour and a half is just like a criminal offense in politics. So I think that there was probably a lot of come to Jesus meetings this morning around the program for tonight. And it'll be interesting if they can make their marks tonight, get past it. But if they can't, this could be like the 1992 convention for Republicans in Houston, where Ronald Reagan was pushed into midnight out of the prime time slot, which was supposed to be his last hurrah.
Well, I don't know how much of this can be contributed to or blamed on overstuffing the schedule, perhaps, or just not, when you're doing those calculations on time, accounting for how many chants of thank you, Joe, you might have to get through before the president actually were to start speaking. Jeannie, I'd love for you to just reflect on the reception he got in that room last night and whether it makes it, frankly, better or worse from him, knowing that he is on his way out.
Yeah, it was an amazing reception. But first of all, they bumped Sweet Baby James for Jamie Raskin and, I don't know, Chris Coons. And I love them both. But, you know, let's get James Taylor back. I think tonight we will see a tighter schedule. Let's hope. To your point, there was a lot of applause for Joe Biden, but it wasn't only that. Not only did they have a lot of speakers, but some of these speeches went so long and they were saying sort of perfunctory things sometimes, like, you know, help me elect Kamala Harris. Well, we all know we're doing that. So there's some nitpicking I could do on the way that this rolled out, but overall, a really warm reception for Joe Biden. These are all his delegates. You know, he's done something quite extraordinary in stepping aside for Kamala Harris. It was not the speech I thought I was going to get. I thought I was going to get more, here's what it's like to work with Kamala Harris. Here's
versus here's what I've done.
Here's who I am. And here's what I've done. But besides that, he's done an extraordinary thing. It was his moment. But you just see when she came out like a rock star last night, that's where the energy is. And I was saying to Rick earlier, imagine if that had been Joe Biden still at the top of the ticket Thursday night, the difference in terms of the reception.
Boy, how true. A lot of things have changed. And one of the more enduring images of last evening, beyond what Jeannie just described, Sean Fain, who runs the United Auto Workers, tearing his shirt open a la Hulk Hogan to show a T-shirt that says, Trump is a scab. And that apparently is going to be a refrain that we hear a lot in this campaign. Is it effective?
Yeah, I don't think the ripping off the blue blazer to show a T-shirt intact was exactly the emotional Hulk Hogan moment. But there's only one Hulk Hogan. Yeah, look, I think that last night actually echoed all the basic themes of the Democratic Party. You had a lot about union labor, right? As if there is no other kind of labor in America but union labor. And I think that's a dangerous place for the Democrats to go, to say that it's only union labor that we speak to. Two, I thought that actually they did an amazing job talking about abortion, putting a public face on it. Republicans didn't talk about abortion at all at the Milwaukee convention, and you would have thought that was something that would get Republicans excited. So what we saw last night was the base politics. You know, what is going to get our people excited? Not a lot of crossover appeal there at all last night.
Well, something else we heard a lot about, in addition to those themes, Rick, was Project 2025. We've heard a lot about this on the campaign trail thus far, but certainly it was a common theme in some of these convention speeches. Here's a little taste.
Donald Trump appointed the Supreme Court justices who got us into this mess. His Project 2025 goes even further. Here's the thing. Trump and Vance simply don't believe in your freedom.
While Trump falsely pleads ignorance of Project 2025, which in my opinion is Jim Crow 2.0. Kamala has been offering the American people enlightened proposals and visionary leadership.
Donald Trump and the Republican friends, they not only can't think, they can't read very well. Seriously, think about it. Look at their Project 2025. Want to do away with the Department of Education.
Rick, I want to come to you on this first, because obviously Donald Trump has now taken pains to distance himself from Project 2025. But given the messaging we're getting out of this convention, is it too late for him to create that separation, knowing many of the authors of this project do have close ties to him?
Yeah, it's really quite a phenomenon, because you wouldn't think something like this would actually go mainstream, right? It's kind of a club issue, right? Republicans and Democrats in high places talk about these policy things, and it very rarely seeps out into the electorate. But in this case, pollster after pollster I've talked to says 2025 is showing up in their verbatims. You know, that people are worried about this plan. They're afraid of it. And they couldn't articulate anything that was in it, but they know it's a bad thing. And so it's actually become a mainstream issue. And I think by virtue of that, Trump's already behind the curve. And do you really want to debate 2025, a plan that people think is a negative plan? So I think that it's going to hurt Republicans. I wouldn't suggest that anybody invest heavily in that. But I think the funniest part is there's a big Trump Tower in Chicago, and they were broadcasting in lights, headquarters of 2025 on the front of it.
I think also
it's
Weird
everywhere.
As Hell was
Yes,
on there.
indeed. Some interesting projections on the buildings walking around Chicago at night. But wait, Rick makes a great point. This is pretty esoteric stuff, and we're hearing people talk about it on a level, Jeannie, I would suggest, Kaylee, that every reference to Project 2025 on the air gets a more vitriolic response on social media, for instance, from both sides of the aisle. How did Democrats make this a thing?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I just wrote a piece on this, and the reason why was because when I was in Europe this summer, the #1 question, to Rick's point, that I was asked from just people on the street, friends, colleagues, what do you think about Project 2025? And to your point, I couldn't get over how this had spread. And, you know, my view of this is that it is quite an opportunity for Democrats. I have read through this, and it is long. And what you find in there are disagreements, fundamental disagreements amongst the Republican Party about critical issues. I wrote about Ukraine, for instance, which divides about 12 ways at this point. So I think of it as an opportunity for Democrats, not just to keep raising it in the way they are, but to try to pull over some folks who might otherwise, if they care about these issues, might go Republican, but they care so much about an issue like Ukraine that they're willing to think about voting the other side, whether it's Senate, House, or the presidency. So it is an opportunity, and Donald Trump knows this, which is why he's trying to walk away from it. But Democrats are saying this week, not so fast. We shall broadcast on Trump Tower.
Well, Jeannie, as you talk about drawing people over, and I raised this conversation with another one of our Democratic strategists we speak to frequently, Kristen Hahn, yesterday, this notion that the people who are here in Chicago are the hardcore Democrats. They were going to vote for the Democratic ticket no matter who it was, if it was Biden or Harris. It is not their enthusiasm that you need. So as everybody comes in confident saying, look at how enthusiastic and energized we all are, those aren't the people you need energized, right? You need to reach out to the people who aren't making the trip to Chicago necessarily, who are still on the fence. Do Democrats risk being too celebratory this week and not doing enough reaching out to those who still may not have their minds made up?
Absolutely. And this is where I felt so nitpicky last night because they were speaking, in my view, many of them. And I would put Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as an exception to this. I think whatever you think of her, she gave a great speech, not substantive necessarily, but in terms of speaking to the audience at home. Because a lot of what happens is like we're watching in the room, you can hear what the crowd is saying and all that stuff, and the speakers are talking to these folks, and it's all of the delegates for Biden and Harris and now Waltz. But at home, people can't hear what's going on the floor. You've got to speak to the people at home, to your point. I didn't find that happened enough last night. I think that's why it dragged on and on and on. They've got to ride that applause, speak over it, and speak to the people at home. And they can't make this about an Acela corridor speech. It's got to be, we're in Chicago, it's got to be to the folks who are going to decide this thing, the independents, moderates in these 7 swing states. So I thought Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, coach her, very very effective last night in terms of the way that they spoke.
It's a good placement. Well, that's the crossover that you were talking about earlier. Rick, you've had to strike that balance. Tonight, it's Barack Obama, ironically, as I sit here with Rick Davis. Is he the one for that job?
You know, probably not. And Monday nights are usually like that internal speak. That's not a surprise. But I think tonight is a really important point that Jeannie's making. I think they really need to open it up. Remember, in 2020, Barack Obama leveled a heavy attack on Donald Trump as being, you know, the end of democracy. Yeah. And a lot of people at the time thought, wow, that's really over the top. I mean, like, this was quite a leveling of an attack on him. And the question for me tonight is, does he reprise his role as a attack dog on Donald Trump, the visionary who has been there, done that, and can, you know, sort of guide the American public, this group that's still trying to make up its mind, who will determine the outcome of the election, not the people in that convention hall. And how will he speak to them about the perils of Donald Trump?
What's interesting is that as he speaks, as Michelle Obama speaks, as the second gentleman speaks, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will not actually be in the convention hall to hear it. They will kind of be counter-programming as they also speak in prime time at a rally in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If you were running this campaign, Rick, would you not have staggered these events so you get the coverage of the rally in the afternoon and then you get the primetime network coverage of the speeches? What do you make of this call?
I think this is really strange. You know, you're counter-programming. That means you don't like the programming in your hall, so you're going somewhere else to get it. That's usually what Republicans do at a convention for Democrats. And it's a crowd event. 18,000 people are going to fill that stadium in Milwaukee, just like the Republican convention. And I think it's a very strange thing. Bad use of money, right? You got a convention hall full of people. You want to go talk to somebody. There they are, right across the river. But the bottom line is she's going to get a moment of her time tonight without actually being in the convention hall. And that's unusual, and I can see the value of that. She's still trying to introduce herself to the American public. And this way, she gets to talk to the people Jeannie's talking about, the undecided voters in a targeted state.
Well, to Kaylee's point, she's supposed to talk at 9 p.m. Eastern. Who are we watching tonight?
We're going to split that screen, Joe Matthew. I think it's very strange. Like, it would have made total sense if it was in the afternoon, or maybe on Friday. She leaves Thursday, goes there. She does need to be in Wisconsin, obviously. She needs to be making these speeches. She needs to take it to Donald Trump. Nothing drives him crazy like her getting a crowd where he just had his convention. But the timing is very, very odd. And the fact that her husband is speaking here, that, you know, you've got the former president, it's strange. Now, do you think maybe they changed the time? I don't know how, but at this point, it's a strange way to schedule things is all I can say.
Unless they're counting on the schedule here running late. Perhaps all the primetime speeches won't actually conflict.
Breakfast with Obama.
Who knows? Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano here for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with us. Basically, we are all spending all of our time together here in Chicago as we broadcast live from the Democratic National Convention. We have a lot more coming up in the next hour. In addition to Rick and Jeannie, we'll be joined by Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts.
Yeah, one of the real fiery moments last night when you saw some anger from Joe Biden was he got one of the suckers and losers line talking about Donald Trump's references to veterans. We'll get into that with the congressman from Massachusetts, a Marine Corps combat veteran.
And we have more guests too, including Fatima Goss Graves of the National Women's Law Center and the co-chair of the Rules and Bylaw Committee for this convention will be joining us as well. Bishop Leah Daughtry will be with us, so stick with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
world of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
From Bloomberg Studios in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. It is day 2, which is also night 2, which of course is when we're going to hear from former President Barack Obama, the former First Lady Michelle Obama, and the current second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff, who will be headlining tonight after the headliner of the first night, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who has now left town and is on vacation in California.
Yeah, Joe Biden has left the building. It went late last night. He left the city and the state as well, Kaylee, to allow the proceedings now to begin in a windup that will bring Kamala Harris Thursday night to her acceptance speech, her formal acceptance speech. Barack Obama will be holding forth later, the former president, who might have some stern words for Donald Trump. All the, by the way, counter-programming this convention throughout the week. Today, he is back in Michigan, something that we'll be talking about later. He's got an event on crime, of course, with Chicago in mind.
Yeah, something the Republicans are hitting very hard, but Democrats were taking a fair number of shots at their own about the Republican Party in general, and specifically the former president. We got a lot of those from President Biden last night, including some pretty powerful, emotional words about what Donald Trump has said about veterans.
Guess who doesn't get it and doesn't respect our veterans? We know from his own chief of staff, the 4-star General John Kelly, that Trump, when in Europe, would not go to the grave sites in one of the in France. The brave service members who gave their lives to this country, he called them suckers and losers. Who in the hell does he think he is? Who does he think he is? There's no words for a person. They're not the words of a person not worthy of being commander-in-chief, period. Not then, not now, and not ever. I mean that. I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
President Biden last evening in one of the more dramatic moments of his address, and it's where we start our conversation now with Congressman Seth Moulton, the Democrat from Massachusetts, has arrived in Chicago. And of course, if you've been with us before, you're aware of his time as a Marine combat veteran serving 4 tours in Iraq. So a unique perspective that we always enjoy sharing, Congressman. It's great to see you in Chicago. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
This clearly made Joe Biden angry. How does it make you feel?
Well, I mean, we all know how important Beau Biden's service is to Joe Biden as a father, as a commander-in-chief, as an American. And it is really remarkable that you have a major party candidate in Donald Trump who just truly hates veterans. And that's not an exaggeration. He has shown time and time and again. He's called us losers and suckers. In other words, losers for signing up, suckers if you get killed. He was walking around Arlington Cemetery with his own chief of staff, Marine veteran John Kelly, when he said, I just don't understand why they did it. What was in it for them? And this, while John Kelly was there in part to see his own son's grave, Lieutenant Kelly, who died in Afghanistan.
Well, whatever you may think about his attitude toward veterans, he does have a veteran running with him in J.D. Vance. Kamala Harris also has a veteran running with her in Tim Walz, and yet his service record has come under immense scrutiny since his selection. J.D. Vance has framed it as stolen valor.
Well, because J.D. Vance is following Donald Trump's playbook of denigrating veterans. And we should be celebrating the fact that, you know, for the first time in a long time, we have 2 veterans on the major party candidates. The first time that we've had veterans really from these most recent wars. And that's something that we should be celebrating. And, you know, both J.D. Vance and Tim Walz have service records that should be lifted up and used as examples. Instead, J.D. Vance is just going down the same path as Donald Trump and attacking the service record of Tim Walz, who by all accounts was a great soldier in the Army.
Well, look, we saw this with your former colleague, John Kerry from Massachusetts, the Swift boats. Of course, we've got some of the same people involved in the messaging in this campaign, and Chris Lasavita, who was part of the Swift boats campaign back in 2004. I was compelled by, I was not happy with this stolen valor accusation, but he said both of you should be thanked for your service. J.D. Vance.
That's right.
And Tim Walz. Is that the way we should approach it?
Exactly. And that's what I just said. I mean, we should be lifting up the fact that both of them have served the country in different and important ways. And, you know, what veterans really hate is other veterans who misrepresent their service, who make their record out to be more than it is. And that fundamentally is what J.D. Vance is trying to accuse Tim Walz of, but it just doesn't hold water. It doesn't hold water at all. And it's not really the way that veterans respect each other. Serving in Congress, I have a lot of veterans on the other side of the aisle that I disagree with on a lot of policy issues, and yet they're often the first people I go to work with. Like if I have to do, work on a piece of bipartisan legislation, like the 988 National Mental Health Hotline. Now it's part of the Veterans Crisis Line as well. I co-authored that bill with an Air Force veteran from Utah. There are a lot of issues we disagreed on, but he was one of the first people I went to work with on that legislation because I knew as a result of our shared service, we had something in common. We had some trust that we shared, some common experience. Even though we did very different things, as an infantry officer in the Marines, as a world record-holding pilot in the Air Force. Chris was amazing. Chris Stewart was an amazing partner. In many ways, much more distinguished military record than mine. I'm not in the Guinness Book of World Records for anything from my time in the Marines. But the point is that we found that common ground, and you would like to see that happening on the presidential stage. But of course, J.D. Vance is just going down in the gutter with Donald Trump. He's much more interested in following Donald Trump's playbook than upholding the values that he should have learned in the Marines.
Well, Congressman, obviously, we thank you for your service and all those who have served or are currently serving. And in recent weeks, Joe and I have had to ask some pretty tough questions about those who are currently serving and whether or not they may have to become active in combat in the Middle East once again, as we cast an eye on Iran, which still has yet to retaliate against Israel, and wait for progress on a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. That, of course, is something Joe Biden wants to achieve with the remaining time as president. He spoke about that on the convention floor last night. Just take a listen briefly to his words.
And we'll keep working to bring hostages home and end the war in Gaza and bring peace and security to the Middle East. We're working around the clock, my Secretary of State, to prevent a wider war and reunite hostages with their families and surge humanitarian health and food assistance into Gaza now. To end the civilian suffering of the Palestinian people. And finally deliver a ceasefire and end this war.
Now, Israel, of course, has accepted this bridge ceasefire proposal from the U.S. Hamas at this time has not. Are you confident that it can be done, or are you still worried that potentially the U.S. could get involved in a deeper conflict in the Middle East?
No, look, I'm very concerned. And it is, let's just be clear, not in our national security interest to be drawn into another massive war in the Middle East. It's not in our interest in terms of our big picture problems around the globe, like focusing on China, where the real focus should be for U.S. national security right now. Of course, there's already a hot war in Ukraine that could spill over into Europe. The last thing we need is to get bogged down in the Middle East. That would be a gift to Xi Jinping in China and Vladimir Putin in Europe. We also want to make sure, by the way, that in the Middle East, we reach a resolution that enables us to truly have peace for Israelis and Palestinians. And we should agree on some common points here. First of all, Israel needs to not just end this war, but actually win it, actually defeat Hamas. You can't have a terrorist organization running Gaza. But they need to do that in a way that has a political endgame that both sides can buy into, that can truly bring peace. Prime Minister Netanyahu hasn't articulated that yet. So this is a complicated situation in some ways because the players have made it so complicated. But it shouldn't be, we should be able to find a lot of common ground here. Let's defeat Hamas. Let's stop killing civilians. Let's have a durable peace plan that is politically acceptable to both Palestinians and Israelis. And ultimately, that not only brings peace to the Middle East, it makes sure that the United States doesn't have to have troops on the ground.
Well, there is a fear, if not an expectation, that Iran is going to retaliate militarily against Israel for the killings of the leader of Hamas and the official from Hezbollah. That means that once again, after what we saw in April, American airmen, sailors could actually be in direct head-to-head combat, essentially, knocking down missiles out of the air, shooting at drones. We're getting very close to a direct engagement in that world with Iran. How nervous does that make you?
That's right. And, you know, the Republicans have attacked President Biden for trying to de-escalate the situation. Let me just be clear. De-escalating the situation is exactly in our interests right now because we do not want to be in a shooting war with Iran. We do not want to be putting U.S. lives at risk here. Now, does Iran need to be deterred from further action? Yes, absolutely. But this is a complex negotiation going on here, and we want to have fundamentally peace between Israelis and Palestinians so that Iran doesn't have the motive to continue these attacks. Let's also not forget that Israel has a serious problem on its northern border with Hezbollah. Yeah. And I think that's a particularly complex situation. There's not an easy answer there. Israel has already seen 100,000 of its citizens displaced. They need to be able to go back to their homes in peace. So, you know, there's a reason why the United States is having a role in the peace process here and why we're trying to stay out of a direct conflict that would fundamentally draw us into a war.
Congressman, it's great to have your expertise as a member of the Armed Services Committee, of course, given your own experience in the region. Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, enjoy your time in Chicago, sir. We appreciate having you. And of course, as we are here at the DNC, Kamala Harris has been drawing a bit of a contrast with President Biden on this issue, speaking perhaps more forcefully about the Israeli government, for example. One thing she hasn't spoken much about, but others did on the convention stage last night, is the historic nature of her candidacy of not just being a woman, but specifically a woman of color. Multiple speakers spoke on that yesterday evening.
Over the next 78 days, we will have to pour every ounce, every minute, every moment into making history on November 5th.
We'd never met, but she saw right through me. She saw the distress. I immediately began crying. And the most powerful woman in the world wiped my tears and listened.
I wish my mother and Kamala's mother could see us. They would say, keep going. Shirley and Jerry would say, keep going. We're not just electing a president, we're uplifting our nation. We're opening the promise of America wide enough for everyone. Together, we've put a lot of cracks in the highest, hardest glass ceiling.
For more now, we're pleased to be joined here in Chicago by Fatima Ghostgrave. She is president of the National Women's Law Center Action Fund, here with us in studio on Bloomberg TV and radio. Fatima, thank you so much for joining us. There has been a lot of conversation already here in Chicago about women's issues, specifically reproductive rights. We saw speakers talking about that on the stage last evening. Is that the issue that secures the vote of American women in November?
Listen, reproductive freedom is certainly on the ballot, and the contrast could not be clearer between what Kamala Harris would do on the issue and what Donald Trump actually did, right? So when Donald Trump ran for office the first time, he promised to overturn Roe, and then he was successful. And now we are seeing what has happened with these Trump abortion bans all around the country. We saw it last night. You could hear a pin drop in the room when people got up and really bravely told their abortion stories, talked about what it was like to seek and access abortion care in this era of Trump bans. It's horrific. And Kamala Harris has been leading on this issue, and actually, in some cases, leading alongside Governor Tim Walz. Together, they went to Planned Parenthood. She's the first vice president or president to actually go to an abortion clinic, and she did it with Governor Walz in Minnesota.
When you talk about abortion being on the ballot, it's literal in a lot of states that have ballot initiatives. How important are they as a mobilizing factor for you?
That's right. I mean, in several states, including some battleground states, there's an actual opportunity for people to directly vote to say that they want the constitutional right to abortion in their state. And we've seen in every election, every time that has happened, it has won. We saw it in Ohio. We saw it in Michigan. We saw it in Kansas, right? So people are clear. It actually matches where voter sentiment is right now. The vast majority of people in this country, they want access to abortion care, and they don't want the government telling them what to do. So it's going to be a huge motivator for people, whether or not, though, there is a ballot initiative, because people understand that the Trump-Vance ticket, that they aren't satisfied just with overturning Roe. They're going for much, much more.
Well, and what is it that you see them going for that most worries you?
Right. I mean, I think a national abortion ban is for sure on the table. But if you look at Project 2025, they talked about restricting medication abortion. So that will be on the table.
So mifepristone, you're concerned about, for example.
For sure. The majority of abortion care is sought through medication abortion.
J.D. Vance was asked about that recently, though. He said that they were not looking to ban mifepristone. You don't think he's being
I mean, that would be him reversing himself, right? Because as a senator, he has advocated for restrictions on mifepristone. And as a senator, he has put forward really extreme ideas on abortion. And so they can't run away from the long record that they had, including the fact that the chaos that we are dealing with right now is a direct result from the Trump Supreme Court and the abortion bans that follow.
We should also note, though, for disclosure, that Donald Trump says that he thinks it should be up to the states. He's trying to be in the middle of the road on this. Like. You don't believe him either on that. You think a national ban is the aim.
So both leaving it up to the states is what's resulting in the chaos, but they're going for more. They're going for a national abortion ban. They want to resurrect something that's called the Comstock Act, which is from the 19th century and would make it nearly impossible to get abortion care in this country.
But I also wonder if it's nearly impossible to actually get that passed into legislation with the way that the Senate works. You need 60 votes. And the same could be said for Kamala Harris saying she promises to restore federally access to abortion care, right? You need Congress to work along with you. And is there really any expectation that could happen no matter who wins the White House in November?
Well, I want to be clear. There's a lot they can do from their perch as president and vice president. We have seen that with this administration. They've used all the tools they have. And with a Trump presidency, we think we'll see the same. He will use the Department of Justice. He'll use HHS. But beyond that, they have said that Kamala Harris has said that if she wins, that she will sign an abortion rights bill. I expect that to happen, and I actually think voters are going to stand for no less. They are going to demand it, and rules won't get in the way.
Sounds like you also expect a Democratic sweep, if that's going to happen, the House and Senate.
I think people are energized. I think that's the direction.
Would be required, though, to get that done, right?
Well, I don't think it's off the table. I think it will happen.
Well, I'm glad that you could come talk to us at the table today in Chicago. Thank you so much for the time. Fatima Goss-Graves, we thank you and have a great rest of your convention week. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons with a lot more to follow. The rest of this hour, live from Chicago, we'll be joined by our political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano on the way in next at the DNC in Chicago. This is Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and Radio.
by celebrating our incredible President Joe Biden, who will be speaking later tonight. Joe, thank you for your historic leadership, for your lifetime of service to our nation, and for all you will continue to do. We are forever grateful to you.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris making a surprise appearance on stage last night at the first night of the DNC. We will, of course, hear from her more formally on Thursday, the last night of the convention, where she will give her acceptance speech. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We are live from Chicago, the scene of the Democratic National Convention. Harris, of course, spoke before President Biden last night. Tonight, we wait for the Obamas and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff. It's going to be another busy day here in the Windy City, Joe.
Yeah, you said it absolutely, as we work our way up to the big moment, of course, on Thursday night. But indeed, Kamala Harris with a surprise appearance there and just a deafening round of applause. You know, we saw Donald Trump at his convention every night in Milwaukee. Nobody expected Kamala Harris to even show her face that early. And of course, she'll be on the road campaigning today. Joining us now, let's assemble our signature panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, also of Iona University. Great to see you both here. Jeannie, it was supposed to be Joe Biden's big night. You could argue that it was, but was that actually the moment to take away from night one?
I think it was. I mean, the applause for Kamala Harris, the energy, her spirit, you know, it had all of those positive vibes we keep hearing about. And so I do think that was the moment. But of course, she and all of the delegates who, let's face it, were Biden delegates, they wanted to pay tribute to Joe Biden. And so it was a big moment for him as well, and historic for Americans. I mean, I think we can't forget that few leaders give up power the way Joe Biden did. And I think the moment of his speech was when he said something like, I love my job, but I love America more. Yeah. And I'm hopeful that he also had a great line where he said he's going to be like their #1 volunteer or something. So, you know, I'm hoping that when he goes out, it's less legacy and more, this is who Kamala Harris is. This is what it's like to work with her. And this is why you should vote for her.
But to that point, Rick, his suggestion that he's going to be an active volunteer as an incumbent president for this other campaign, two former presidents, not just Obama tonight, but former President Bill Clinton will be speaking here in Chicago this week. Former First Ladies, as Hillary Clinton already did. She, of course, also former Secretary of State. They're all here. Right. That was not the case in Milwaukee. You didn't see the Bushes. You didn't see Cheney. You didn't even see Mike Pence, who served Donald Trump as vice president. What difference does that make?
Well, Mike Pence probably feared for his life in that crowd.
Sure,
so,
yeah, he stayed far away.
Imagine why he is.
He was in Wyoming or.
But look, I mean, that is the difference between the Republican Party post-Trump and the Republican Party pre-Trump. We would have done the same kind of program, you know, and celebrated our leadership, right? Even the Trump cabinet wasn't in attendance. Most of them aren't even supporting him. So it is a bit of a contrast, and I think that's part of what the Democrats are trying to accomplish here is like, we're much more institutional. We used to be the crazy rabble-rousing Democrats, you know, and no respect for history and status. And, you know, they're always going to be the rock throwers, you know, at the party. And they are now the establishment. And Trump is the rock thrower. And so it's redefined what the parties are to the American public. And you see this in the reactions to their candidacies now. And so Kamala Harris, how she did it, I don't know. They'll study this for decades. But she went from being a sitting vice president in an administration that is disliked to being the change candidate in 2024. And I don't think I've ever seen that happen in modern political campaigns like that. Yeah, it's just a remarkable change.
The role that former President Barack Obama will play, Rick mentioned earlier, will he be the attack dog? Is he going to be the one who goes after Donald Trump on behalf of Kamala Harris in this campaign? What do you think? What are we going to hear tonight?
I think what we're going to hear is, this is the Kamala Harris I've known for 20 years. I mean, you go back to 2004 when he emerged and became the superstar that he became and then ultimately president. Kamala Harris went to that convention. They've never worked together formally, but they've known each other for years. They've endorsed each other. She bucked the Democratic Party in 2007 and endorsed him, then went to Iowa and campaigned, like handing out pizza on his behalf. And she was, you know, so they've known each other a long time. And I think what we're going to hear is this is who she is. This is the person I've known. This is why I made the rare step. I think it was like 2013 of cutting a television ad for her when she was running for the Senate. So he is going to, I hope, talk more about that. And I hope less about the attacks on Donald Trump. People don't know her yet, and they need to. And so I hope that's what he does. And of course, Gwen Ifill, the legendary journalist who said, you know, something like on David Letterman, she is in many people's minds, meaning Kamala Harris, the new Barack Obama. I would love to see a clip of that. Love Gwen Ifill myself. But, you know, that's the kind of thing I hope we hear. People need to know she's just not just emerged from nowhere. She has been around a long time, and she has been working hard with the Democratic Party.
Well, as you call us back to 2019 when she was running against Joe Biden, she got in that primary pulled to the left. And seeing the speakers list tonight, at least some of the confirmed speakers, include progressives like Senator Bernie Sanders. Does she risk being pulled by some elements of the party to the left again, or do you think she can hold the center?
I think she has to hold the center. This is such a tight race, and I'm trying to understand, you know, why are they counter-programming, as we talked about? Maybe it's so they don't get wrapped up in the Bernie Sanders of it all. You know, I think she's got to. We've heard her change positions on everything from fracking to a host of other issues, so she's going to have to do that if she hopes to win. Democrats are energized, but Donald Trump can take this thing very, very easily. It's neck and neck.
Well, now she's got big food to deal with. Rick, we talked last week about her economic proposal, and I suspect we're going to hear this again on Thursday night, a federal ban on price gouging. She wants to go after food companies' price of groceries. This was just a day after Donald Trump surrounded himself with actual groceries in a prop kind of a show at Bedminster. The food industry does not like this idea, and they don't think that she's being fair. Pushing back on the idea with a statement from the National Grocers Association, the proposal calling for a ban on grocery price gouging is a solution in search of a problem. Does she need to be more specific about this?
I don't think she can be. How do you actually tackle gouging? And how do you even identify it? The root cause of gouging would be that your commodity prices are low and you're selling it for much higher than you are. But everyone knows part of the problem is the supply chain. And instead of saying, hey, let's fix that supply chain, let's have a much more resilient supply chain for consumer goods like groceries, she goes after the people who are putting them on the shelf. And so I don't know. I mean, I haven't found a single Democrat who can actually articulate for me what the policy change is for the President of the United States, either an executive order or a bill that actually can get at the heart of price gouging, or even if it's that big a problem.
Well, certainly we've seen economists, including some Democratic communists. Wow, communist is something Donald Trump
Freudian
is calling
slip, I'm sure.
Kamala Harris, Comrade Kamala. Democratic economists who have served Democratic administrations like Jason Furman, for example, have criticized her policy. Economists have also criticized the policy proposals of Donald Trump. There has been suggestions both of their policy platforms could be inflationary, that they would add to the deficit if there's no way to spend for some of these things, whether it be tax cuts or incentives for first-time home buyers. Rick, it does feel like on kind of all sides, there is a certain level of intellectual dishonesty here. My question, it doesn't matter if voters buy it.
Yeah, well, my biggest fear is what if it's not dishonest intellectually? What if they actually plan to do these things? And as you point out, highly inflationary policies by both candidates. You would think that the Biden administration would be uber sensitive to doing anything in policy that would actually add to inflation. Yet trillions of dollars in new spending was articulated by candidate Harris in her presentation last week of her economic plan, which by most standards, I think economists who've opined on it say this is inflationary, only to be compared by even higher spending by Donald Trump. Everybody wants a tax cut. Everybody wants cheaper goods. How do you get to it? So I actually think it's pretty disingenuous on both parties' side. It'll be interesting to see if the voters get the joke on that, right? Do they actually differentiate between these policies, or do they just say, big spenders all, right?
Well, and
There's
that's
no
my
difference.
question for the people in the room as well. We're on Bloomberg. We're obsessing over this stuff. Does anybody care about inflationary policy in that room, or it's just Kamala Harris on Thursday night?
You know, I think in the room, it's going to be Kamala Harris. Look, we're in Chicago. It's like if you went to watch Oprah back in the day and you got that car, you really were very happy.
Reach under your
but
seat.
none of it adds up. You know, price gouging, the answer to that, if it's happening, to Rick's point, and you can identify it, you have to use the bully pulpit. You have to embarrass the folks who are doing that. So this is all feel-good stuff. Her $25,000. I know what it's like to buy a first home. It's awful in this environment. I get it, but that is not the answer, because with both of these proposals, they don't add up. We don't have details. All you can see is federal spending, federal spending, federal spending. So it's a big problem from both of these camps. And I think we have to look at ourselves as voters and, to your point, say, why don't we demand more and better from these folks out there on the campaign trail?
Well, on the campaign trail, our very own Mark Niquette here at Bloomberg actually had the chance to question Donald Trump in Pennsylvania when he was making a stop there on his swing states tour this week about things he has said about funded dependents. And what brought this to mind, Jeannie, was your talk about first-time home buyers. Hello. It's not just the down payment, it's also interest rates are really high, right? And it has a political implication. If interest rates are, as expected, going to go lower before the election, what that ultimately means for voters. For all of the talk about the fiscal policy ideas of these candidates, is it actually what translates in the ballot box, what's happening with monetary policy, which none of them, whether Donald Trump would like to or not, actually have anything to do with?
Yeah, I think so. And you know, one of the things we've talked a lot about here on Bloomberg has been the disjuncture between what people are feeling and what the numbers show. And we see a continuation of that on the campaign trail. And so I know we may see lower interest rates, I hope for all of our sakes, but you know, I wonder, is it going to be early enough to translate into votes? Let's not forget, I think Pennsylvania starts voting early in like 25 days. So does that have an impact on young people looking to buy their first home, or are they still annoyed with how high they've been? So, you know, there is a time lapse that occurs, but I do think both of these campaigns have to get to talk to people like you folks and have to answer hard questions about the numbers.
Conversation is
and they don't have to at this point.
So when you finally sit down, Rick, and you do an interview and you start getting some tough questions about this, does that change the way voters look at these proposals?
Yeah, I think if you can't explain what a pact is going to have your policies on the voters, I think you're going to have a really hard time closing the deal. And nobody's closed the deal yet. This election, as Jeannie points out, is very much in doubt. And I would say Friday, Jerome Powell's talk is probably going to have just as much impact on those economically geared voters than anything you're going to hear for 4 nights here in Chicago. So tune in Friday to see what really young people are going to think about those interest rates.
Well, and on interest rates, back to what Donald Trump told Mark Niquette, he did kind of double down on his notion that the Fed shouldn't be independent, that he does think the president should at least have a voice. It's just whether or not their voice is heard isn't necessarily up to them. We've heard Democrats, including Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, say you have to take Donald Trump at his word. And this comes back to the other conversation we were having about his economic policies. Do you believe, should he be president, these things actually come to fruition?
Yeah, I think that we used to say when he was first elected, don't listen to what he says, just watch what he does. Well, that pretty much became the same thing. And the reality is, I don't think he's making false promises. I think he believes in tariffs, and he put them in place when he was president, and I think he'll double down on that, as he has said, both with Europe and with Asia, which has an inflationary impact to it. I have absolutely no doubt you got to believe what he says when it comes to going after the Fed independence. He'll find every which way he can, including the bully pulpit, to try and get what he needs out of the Fed economically, because without a lot of hyper growth, his policies don't work. I mean, you continued making the tax cuts permanent. I mean, that's a big hole of trillions of dollars over the next 10 years. So at the end of the day, I think we have to take these candidates on face value, that they're making these promises, and that we have to be able to make a decision by them. But right now, both of them want tax cuts and excessive government spending and no attention to the deficit.
Just quickly, Jeannie, to Rick's point that you have to take both of them at face value, has Kamala Harris proven that she can be taken at her word, given the flip-flops we have seen that you alluded to earlier, be it on fracking or healthcare or otherwise?
You know, I think we have to take her at her word. I think she is going to try her hardest to fulfill these promises she is making now. To your point, she has flip-flopped, but the reality is that's why the down ballot races matter so much. Who controls the House? Who controls the Senate? Becomes a lot tougher to do these things. But guess what? If we have divided government again, we are going to be with a debt ceiling problem and all the rest, and a government that probably can't operate. So it is not, I mean, there's a lot of excitement down here, so I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but November is going to be pivotal depending on what happens with the House and the Senate at this point.
All right, well, we still got to get through this week first, and we do so with the help of Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Thank you so much. But of course, as we're here in Chicago, we also have our eye in New York on the financial markets. And Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle has a check on that for us now. Hey, Abigail.
Hey, Kelly. Well, we are seeing a little bit of a downside trade here for stocks. The S&P 500 right now down about 0.3%. That's a pretty small decline, but what makes it stand out is it's the first down day in the last 9. The S&P 500 had been in its best streak since 2022, the longest since 2023, but today taking a little bit of a breather, and a lot of this has to do with the chip space. We have some real weakness for the chips, in particular NVIDIA today down 2.1%. And I suspect that while we have all these macro factors going on, such as the DNC, uncertainty around election 2024, one of the bigger ones right now is liquidity. We have that dollar-yen down for a third day in a row, down more than 2%. That tells us that the haven yen is strengthening and that the yen carry trade is coming apart just a little bit today. If we go below recent lows for the dollar-yen, we could see the kind of selling that we saw just a few weeks ago as that cheap money really just comes out of the system. That is why NVIDIA is lower. Too far, too fast, people rethinking that AI frenzy and if they want to be in on it without the aid of cheap money. But, you know, of course, it is, as you all know, and we've been talking about, DNC week and then election 2024. The uncertainty around this election is really pretty interesting. Yes, Kamala Harris, VP Harris, is very much in the lead, but Donald Trump is not so far behind, given the amount of time that we have, that there couldn't be some interesting maneuvers that go on. Markets are watching this, and one index, that VIX index that I do like to talk about, it for October, November, and later this year, well above current levels in the Bloomberg terminal. It shows that we have that VIX much, much higher. And this is actually the NASDAQ 100 that we're seeing here, a little bit of a dip that we were talking about. But that VIX, that uncertainty trade, it's, again, higher as we get closer to the election. A big factor, though, of course, is going to be the Fed. Will they cut? And all investors, one of the favorite events this year, and I would say for some Bloomberg investors, viewers, they're probably thinking more about Friday and Jackson Hole, Fed Chair Jay Powell's speech, more so than the DNC. Over the last 3 months, it's remarkable the move down that we've seen in the 2-year yield and the 10-year yield, both below 4%, getting ready for the Fed to potentially cut. It's expected 3 to 4 cuts this year. What makes this so interesting, Joe and Kaylee, is the fact that we have everybody talking about high inflation, Kamala Harris, some of her policy that she's begun to outline, really taking issue with that. If the Fed does cut, that would actually seem to stir inflation more. So you have this really interesting tension between the real world inflation and what the Fed's going to do and risk assets. We'll, of course, be watching it all here on Bloomberg.
And then there's what's happening in Chicago. Speaking of the real world, Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for your eyes on the markets. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power. It is the Tuesday edition. It's day 2 here at the DNC. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons. And joining us now is Lester Munson, BGR Group Principal and Managing Director of the International Practice, Republican strategist who you frequently see here as one of our panelists on Balance of Power, who, yes, is in town for this Democratic convention. Are you part of some Oppo war room or something? What brings you to the Democratic Party?
Well, this is where the action is. It's also my hometown.
Okay.
And I came here hoping to see, a little street action, some convention action. Chicago at its finest. Couldn't stay away.
Got it. Well, it's going pretty well for you then, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I think Republicans would also say that it was going pretty well for them in Milwaukee at the RNC last week. It was a different race then. It was Donald Trump still thinking he was up against Joe Biden. And Republicans, frankly, pretty much universally that we spoke with, were feeling pretty good about their chances. Being here in Chicago, seeing the energy that Democrats are now bringing to this city, how much has your calculus changed?
Well, I think the Milwaukee example is a terrific reminder of how quickly hubris can be dissipated here in American politics, and I think Democrats should be at least a little bit cautious. Kamala Harris is not fully tested out on the campaign trail. This balloon is probably going to pop. This balloon of popularity is probably going to pop at some point. And how does she react then? How does she engage with Trump on the campaign trail? Can she match him blow for blow? Can she kind of match his negative energy energy. I suspect that's what we're going to be talking about in about a month or a month and a half.
Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have been compelled to stay on the trail this week. They've added events to sort of counter-program this convention. The former president will be in Michigan today talking about crime, for instance. Is that time well spent because they're having trouble breaking through the news flow?
Yeah, crime's an issue for sure, particularly here in Chicago, which is the murder capital of the United States, I believe, for like 12 years running. There's a certain civic anti-pride in that, I guess. So it's not a bad issue for the Republicans to be bringing up, but I think you're right. This force field of Democratic optimism about their ticket is very strong, and it doesn't seem to be getting through into the United Center at all.
Well, and frankly, that isn't unique to just this week in Chicago that Trump has had to try to counter program. It's been basically a month of coverage since Kamala Harris became the Democratic presumptive nominee, that she has really overshadowed Donald Trump in a lot of ways. And perhaps you're seeing some of that frustration borne out in the news conferences he's decided to hold, et cetera. Is it working, Lester? What does he need to do differently?
You know, I think it's interesting. I think Trump himself is not doing well. He's kind of following his own instincts and talking about silly things like he's better looking than Kamala Harris or some ridiculous argument like that. Vance is actually going after the issues that are probably better for Republicans. So even though Vance's popularity may be an issue, he's a more effective kind of counter agent to what the Democrats are doing right now. I wonder if Trump, you know, after the near-death experience has kind of decided he's just going to go his own way and do what he wants to do and not listen to his handlers anymore. His handlers were doing pretty good up until that assassination attempt, but since then, he seems to have kind of lost his mojo.
Your background brings a specialty in foreign policy, and we've got a pretty big story cooking this week with real developments, it seems, in ceasefire talks in Israel. What do you make of the White House coming out with this yesterday? The Secretary of State, we've got a framework, but actually, once again, it's not a deal. Benjamin Netanyahu, I guess, signed off on it. Hamas has a different agenda here, and this might not come together. Were they trying to land an announcement of a ceasefire during this convention?
It's hard to think that they were going to do this incredibly complicated negotiation and have it land, you know, on this moving aircraft carrier of the DNC convention in these 4 days. So I suspect that's not it. I was very interested that the administration made the announcement about Hamas having to accept this deal during this convention, which potentially provokes some of the protesters on the streets here in Chicago. I thought that was actually courageous by the folks who are working the administration these days, and good for them.
Well, when we consider the policy stance around the ongoing war, whether or not there's a ceasefire in place by November or not, there does seem to be a perception within the Democratic Party that Kamala Harris is more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, more willing to go harder against Benjamin Netanyahu. But she, too, has been part of this Biden administration that has been so heavily criticized for its conduct. So do you really believe there is nuance in the approach here between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? Because it's been described as by John Kirby, for example, as no daylight between them.
Right. I think right now she's allowed to have it both ways. She can be allied with Joe Biden and his support for the state of Israel while saying she's a voice for the Palestinians and the concerns of the protesters. She's trying to have it both ways. I don't think that's sustainable for 90 more days into the election, but we'll see if she's held to account for that.
One of the moments that endures from last evening was Sean Fain of the UAW. We spent a lot of time together on this program talking about the UAW strike. He's, of course, endorsed Kamala Harris. His T-shirt read, "Trump is a scab." Is that the kind of rhetoric for the moment?
Well, I think, you know, this is going to be a vibe election or a meme election or even a name-calling election. And even Steve Kerr last night, who is, of course, a member of the Chicago Bulls championship teams here and is beloved in the city for that, famously fought with Michael Jordan in a practice, pretty good coach, got the gold medal.
Fresh off the Olympics.
He was fresh off the Olympics. He did a great job of taking the high road for 6 minutes, but kind of delivered kind of the negative message at the very end of what he was saying. So I think even the best messengers are not immune to what is going to be a very negative political campaign here.
Well, in a lot of ways, after the conventions are over, the way in which that negativity will be circulated, to your point, may be online, it may be over the airwaves in TV ads. Something else we have to consider here is potentially the massive financial advantage that Kamala Harris could have over Donald Trump. And that's frankly true of the Democratic Party, be it the congressional or Senate committees versus the Republican counterparts. Lester, how do you think about the money equation here and how that makes things more difficult for Republicans all over the ballot?
Well, I think Democrats need more money to be competitive against a guy like Donald Trump, who is, frankly, so good at getting free press and getting when his message is on and he's getting where the voters are, he can do it for free. Democrats have struggled with that. Hillary Clinton outspent him 2 or 3 to 1 back in 2016. He still managed to win that election. So I think Democrats need that infusion of cash to be competitive with him. And I think that's a large part of the reason.
So the money makes this a wash, basically?
I think in a way, I think it makes it a wash. You've got paid media and earned media. Republicans are a little better at the earned media right now, frankly, whatever you think of their message. Democrats are better at the paid media. That does kind of equal things out.
Interesting. What's got your attention in the next couple of days as a Republican watching this Democratic convention?
So I went to see the protests yesterday at the park where they designated for the protesters to be about half a mile away from the United Center, and there's a lot of police activity there. Looks like everything's under control. The Chicago police are using it as an opportunity to launch their own protest against the way they're being treated by the city government here in the city of Chicago, where they have real disagreements with the mayor. So I love the fact that it's really the local politics at the end of the day that matter on the street here, not the national politics.
This is Chicago, right? That's the way this goes. Lester, thanks for meeting us in your hometown. Lester Munson with us on Balance of Power. Unions, as we're discussing a key focus here at the Democratic National Convention that certainly came about last night. One of the first unions to endorse the Harris-Walz ticket, the aforementioned United Auto Workers, is now threatening a nationwide strike. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has details on this. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. The president of the United Auto Workers used his speech last night on the Democratic National Convention floor to threaten a nationwide walkout over allegations that car maker Stellantis isn't living up to one of their contracts. I want you to take a listen here to UAW President Shawn Fain last night at the DNC.
Stellantis must keep the promises they made to America in our union contract. And the UAW will take whatever action necessary at Stellantis or any other corporation to stand up and hold corporate America accountable.
At odds is the reopening of an idle plant in Illinois. In a statement Tuesday, Stellantis said it notified the union the plans for that plant had been delayed and added in part, quote, the UAW agreed to language that expressly allows the company to modify product investments and employment levels. Therefore, the union can't legally strike. Now, labor is becoming a big part of efforts for both of these campaigns as they campaign here in the Midwest. We know that when Minnesota Governor Tim Walz joined the Harris-Walz ticket, all of those union endorsements started to fall into place. Even DNC Chair Jamie Harrison said that part of the process to pick Chicago as the convention site was because of the city's close relationship with labor. But when we look at how both of these campaigns are trying to court this labor vote, we know that they're targeting some critical states in the Midwest, such as Wisconsin and Michigan. When we look at our latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult polling, Joe and Kaylee, it shows that Vice President Kamala Harris is now in a statistical tie with former President Trump when we look at our key 7 battleground states that some of these workers are really going to be looking at both of these candidates in.
Well, and of course, Tyler, Donald Trump is going to be in Michigan today. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to Wisconsin, actually to Milwaukee, the Pfizer Forum, where we saw a union leader speak during the Republican convention last month. The Teamsters, President Sean O'Brien, countering perhaps the Sean we got last night, the UAW president, Shawn Fain, here at the DNC. How should we be thinking about Trump's relationship with union leadership as well, when, as you say, so many have lined up behind the Harris-Walz ticket, but not all?
Right. Well, the Teamsters is one of those big unions that still has not endorsed the ticket. As you mentioned, Teamsters President Sean O'Brien did address the Republican National Convention last month. He is not slated to address the DNC, although we are learning through reports that Sean O'Brien is working with Vice President Kamala Harris's team to set up a roundtable with members of his union and himself to try to talk about the path forward as they are weighing this endorsement. It'll be interesting to see because the Teamsters actually haven't endorsed a Republican for president since 1988, and we all know that former President Trump would like to reverse that trend.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall here in Chicago. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And still with us here in Chicago is our political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. They, of course, are a partner at Stone Court Capital and a senior fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, respectively, as we look ahead to night 2 of this convention. As we just mentioned with Tyler, obviously Kamala Harris is not going to be in the hall. in the United Center tonight. She will instead be in Wisconsin. Who we will get instead, I guess, if we're making the decision to watch the convention feed and not the Wisconsin rally feed, Jeannie, is the Obamas, not just former President Barack Obama, but First Lady Michelle Obama, who polling suggests is one of the most popular Democratic figures in the country right now. We can talk a lot about someone who sat in the Oval Office himself and the message he will bring, but what about her? Because it wasn't too long ago that people were floating the idea that she herself may run for president instead of Biden.
Yeah, that's right. When I was leaving the RNC and we were stuck in the airport, all I heard from people attending, they were feeling good, was, gosh, I hope Michelle Obama doesn't decide to run if Joe Biden gets out. So to your point, not only is she popular with Democrats, Republicans were scared of her, at least in that airport. And I think we're going to hear from Michelle Obama and Barack Obama not a legacy speech like we heard with Biden last night, but we are going to hear this is who Kamala Harris is. This is the Kamala Harris we've worked with for 20 years that we know, and this is why you should elect her. And that is really what they are up there to do tonight. And my understanding is in Milwaukee, it's going to be dubbed a watch party. So I guess they're going to go rally those Wisconsinites and then watch the DNC. So, you know, they're trying to guess the best of both worlds. She cannot lose Wisconsin, as we know. So
pretty good media strategy, right? Do they end up capturing multiple hours of network TV coverage?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful in the sense of, like, you're in a targeted state. It's a really key city within Wisconsin. I mean, like, it was the first place she went to hold a rally after becoming the presumptive nominee. Going back to that well and sort of pinging Donald Trump that I'm in your concert or convention hall and I've got just as many people as you did. Wow. You know, his thing for crowd size, you know, and so I'm sure that this isn't divorced from that. But it is a little strange that she's counter-programming her own convention. But these days, what's not strange about this election cycle? So it's in keeping with that. But good for her to be planted in a targeted state. Those things still matter.
Well, I wonder if that's the strategy here. You know that Donald Trump has a thing about crowds, so you go to places he's been, try to draw the biggest crowds possible, knowing that he tends to get a little bit less disciplined in moments in which he is upset. Jeannie, is that how they need to proceed when they leave this convention and carry on to that stretch to the election?
Yeah, it's almost like she doesn't have to say anything about him or to him or make fun of him, certainly, but just her mere existence of drawing crowds, to Rick's point, moving up in the Bloomberg Council poll and all the rest is enough to drive him to say things that his campaign wishes he wouldn't say. So I think tonight is part of that, but I think the real thing here, you look at Barack Obama, you look at Joe Biden, Democrats need Wisconsin. There is no way around that. So great you're in Chicago for this great city, but you've got to get 90 miles down the road and you've got to win that vote there. You've got to get that state.
I just have to ask quickly to go back to what Tyler was talking about, the Teamsters and Sean O'Brien, who asked to speak. He asked for a slot at this convention. He was not invited to speak with the other union leaders last night. Was that a loss for Democrats?
I think so. I thought they should have invited him right after the Elon Musk interview when he criticized Trump. If you're going to bump James Taylor, put Sean O'Brien in there. That's what I say.
Would you try to warm up to the Teamsters now if you were running this convention?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's crazy not to sort of try and play that card because, of course, what would upset Donald Trump more than having the Teamster president, they came to his convention that they implied was an endorsement, which wasn't an endorsement, show up and do exactly the same thing, reprise his role here. I think they're missing an opportunity, but then again, I'm not for extending the program any longer.
Yeah, don't worry. We already had one late night here. We'll see how we do tonight. Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano, thank you so much for the great analysis. And coming up, we're going to be back in just a couple of hours, Kaylee. The late edition of Balance of Power starts 5 p.m. East Coast time.
Indeed, and we'll be joined by 2 Democratic members of Congress, Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland and Haley Stevens of Michigan. It's going to be another packed show, so come join us later. In the meantime, Bloomberg Business Week is just around the corner. They'll be back in New York. Joe and I here in Chicago, Bloomberg TV and radio.
connection lost.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
A very good afternoon, everyone, live on Bloomberg TV, radio, YouTube, and at Bloomberg Originals. It's Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenevec, along with my co-host, Katie Greifeld of Bloomberg News and Bloomberg Television, in for Carol Masser this afternoon. Katie, welcome back to Bloomberg Business Week. How are you?
Tim, I am thrilled to be here, I have to say.
Well, hey, we're thrilled to have you. We got a great program coming up. We're going to talk markets because it would have been, and maybe still could be, the 9th straight day of gains for the S&P 500. Stocks, though, struggling following that furious rally that's put the market within striking distance of all-time highs. We're going to have much more on the trade in just a minute.
Now, still ahead, day 2 of the Democratic National Convention. We have some big speakers tonight after last night's passing of the baton from President Biden. We get the latest from Joe Matthew in Chicago in just a minute.
And speaking of politics, for Democrats this season, Fox News is too big to ignore. Our media reporter details why a growing number of Democrats are flocking to Fox News as guests.
And on the jobs front, the Fed confronts up to 1 million U.S. jobs vanishing in revisions. We get those numbers tomorrow. We'll explain what's going on.
Yeah, Stuart Paul standing by in just a moment to give us the details on that. All that and more over the next hour. First up, though, a check on the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Feller.
Hi, thank you very much. We are very close to session lows. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ will throw on the Russell 2000. All very much in the red right now with the S&P down 14. S&P at 55.94. That is a drop now of just about 0.2%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 76, drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ down 64, drop there of 0.4%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares hardest hit, down now by about 1.3%. Bottom line here, stocks struggling to make headway following a furious rally that put the market within striking distance of records. Again, S&P trading lower, S&P down now by 0.2%. The 10-year 3.82%, the 2-year 4.00%. Gold up $5 the ounce, up 0.2%, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 0.4%. Netflix shares are extending their rally today for a sixth session to hit a record as the company's changes to its streaming platform rekindle subscriber and sales growth. Today, Netflix is advancing by 1.4%. Recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 0.2%, the 10-year 3.82%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Do appreciate it. Well, it is day 2 of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Former President Barack Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, they are all set to speak tonight. Last night, though, President Joe Biden delivered an emotional and bittersweet call for Democrats to rally behind Kamala Harris as his party used the first night of its convention in Chicago to celebrate his presidency while simultaneously passing the torch to a new generation.
I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, but I gave my best to you. For 50 years, like many of you, I've given my heart and soul to our nation. And I've been blessed a million times in return for the support of the American people. I've either been too young to be in the Senate because I wasn't 30 yet, and too old to stay as president. But I hope you know how grateful I am to all of you.
That was, of course, President Biden last night in Chicago, kicking off the Democratic National Convention. Let's go now to Chicago, where we find Joe Matthew, the co-host of Bloomberg Balance of Power, joining us from the DNC. Joe, before we get to tonight, talk a little bit about last night and the significance of President Biden kicking off the convention. My understanding is 4 minutes of applause for the president before he took the stage.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, guys, he didn't get on until 11:30 at night on
I
the
was
East
long
Coast,
asleep.
so a lot of people actually probably didn't see the address. Yeah, most people were who have to go to work the next day. So there actually was some criticism about discipline when it comes to the run of show. They had to cancel James Taylor last night, for crying out loud, and a couple of other speakers just to make room for this. And still, the president found himself on TV at midnight, which was not part of the plan. But look, this is something that he put a lot of time preparing for, and obviously was one of the most important moments in his political career, ending what was, by the way, for him, his 13th Democratic National Convention. He got angry at times. We saw him shed a tear, too. That 4 minutes of applause you described, he had to take the handkerchief out and wipe away a tear. This is a big deal. This is, you know, the beginning of the big wind down, and he's left town. He's now in California with his family on vacation, not to play a role in the rest of this convention.
Well, let's talk about what's still to come. Of course, Barack Obama scheduled to speak tonight. But what's interesting, and I was talking to Kayleigh Lyons about this earlier today, is that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, they won't actually physically be there at the DNC tonight. There will be some counter-programming.
Counter-programming their own programming, which is kind of curious. Look, there's been a lot of new stuff in this cycle. We haven't really heard of this before, but if it works out right, this might look really smart tomorrow. They're going to Milwaukee, where we were for the Republican National Convention, to stand on the same stage that Donald Trump stood on. They're going to try to pack the building here, and they're going to have a watch party in Chicago. So we could be in a world in which the speeches from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz get television coverage before the primetime segment, or in the middle of the primetime segment, when we see former President Barack Obama. Could this end up being like roadblock coverage for several hours tonight? Possibly. That seems to be what they're reaching for, and to goad Donald Trump a little bit if they can get a bigger crowd in the room.
I don't envy those television producers who have to make these choices tonight, Joe. Hey, I am curious about some of the lineup at the Democratic National Convention, because we did learn earlier today from a report from I believe it was NBC News, talking about Stephanie Grisham, who was White House press secretary under the Trump administration. She is going to appear at the Democratic National Convention. Talk a little bit about Republicans who are there.
Well, that's one of very few Republicans here, to be honest with you. The counter-programming on the Republican side from the Trump campaign is happening across the country. Donald Trump today is back in Michigan. J.D. Vance is holding events, and they're trying to do this each day, interfacing with reporters to the extent that they can try to goad Kamala Harris into holding a news conference. But you're right, Stephanie Grisham was the press secretary in the Trump White House for essentially the last year. She was 19 through the middle of 2020 and has had a number of unflattering things to say about the administration, so not a huge shocker to see her on the list. The headliner is going to be Barack Obama, though. Second gentleman Doug Emhoff is on the list here. It's just coming together. We haven't seen the final program, but this is what we know. The governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, who was on the short list at one point, at least to be a running mate, will be on the stage as well. And Michelle Obama, let's remember, we're talking about probably the most popular Democratic figure who's going to be on that stage this week, short of Kamala Harris. And that's going to be a big moment as well for the delegates who are in the room. I would expect to see a lot of coverage tonight based on the names who will be at the podium.
Yeah, big time. A lot to look forward to there, including Michelle Obama. But let's talk about what's going on with the Trump campaign as well, because our colleague Mark Niquette had an interview with Donald Trump, which was really interesting, got him going on that Fed criticism. He said that basically, I'm not calling the shots, but I can speak my opinion about Fed policy, as can anyone else. And I thought that was really interesting, Joe, because that's true, but he's not exactly an ordinary citizen, is he?
Well, no, and to get a phone call from the president, it's typically one you take no matter your job. And yeah, he's made it clear, he's doubling down on this, that he does want to have a hand in setting interest rates, setting interest rate policy. And it's something that we've heard from Kamala Harris in the complete opposite. She has professed to maintain total independence from the Fed, as the Biden-Harris administration has done. So there's a real contrast on this one in a world where there's actually some overlap on issues, things like an expanded child tax credit, where people are wondering, gosh, were there no taxes on tips? I'm kind of hearing the same on both sides here. There are limits to the overlap, but this is one of real contrast. That probably is not a household argument for a lot of people, but here on Bloomberg and in the investment community is a pretty big deal.
There's also, speaking of overlap when it comes to policies, Trump could offer, he said, anything to prospective home buyers who are struggling to afford a down payment. He was asked that by Mark Niquette, and he said he, quote, might do that in terms of offering. Are we starting to see, do you think we'll see more policy overlap, at least when they're trying to appeal to sort of the populist wing of the parties?
It sure sounds like it, and I don't really know how a billionaire can be an economic populist, but he's going for it, and they are throwing. This is the time when we're throwing things at the wall to see what will stick. They both delivered economic policy addresses last week, as you know, Tim. You guys covered it, and both were pretty short on details, to be honest. They're going to need to flesh out these plans in interviews and in news conferences, if they choose to, but we're getting pretty esoteric on some of this stuff. You're right, though. You give everybody in the world $25,000 for a down payment. It's not everybody in the world, but it's over a million first-time home buyers. There's going to be an impact on the market. If you have a price gouging ban, as Kamala Harris is proposing, it's going to have an impact on corporate America. And in this case, it's unclear exactly how that would work. How do you qualify what gouging is, and could you pass that on Capitol Hill? So you start asking hard questions, you don't always get answers at this stage. They're trying to crank out good headlines that mobilize people with as little information as possible.
Okay, Joe, before we let you go, just give us an idea of the counter-programming, not from the Harris administration, or the Harris campaign, rather, but from the Trump administration, or the Trump campaign, I should note. Yesterday they were in Pennsylvania. What are they doing today? What are they doing for the remainder of the week?
Well, they've split up, to tackle the map here a little bit. Donald Trump, as I mentioned, is in Michigan today, arguably one of the most important swing states, the top three. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin is where everyone's basically living. On the trail now, he's going to be in a town called Howell, Michigan, to talk about crime. And he's going to be talking about Chicago and the crime stats here in this city. J.D. Vance is in Wisconsin, in Kenosha. As I mentioned, it's not a mystery where these guys are. He's holding a news conference interestingly, about crime. So they're both talking about the same thing in two different swing states, and they're going to continue this likely over the course of the week. The question is, can they crack the roadblock coverage of this Democratic National Convention on cable news? They've been having a hard time doing that since Kamala Harris got to the top of the ticket.
Well, Joe, one more question on crime, and then I promise we will let you go. But obviously, you are on the ground in Chicago. What's the mood music like? I mean, there's been a lot of concern and speculation over protests. What are you actually seeing?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of protesters here. So far, we haven't had any reports of destruction or violence. A couple of people tried to jump barriers last night, and that's pretty good for tens of thousands if there are that many of them here. It's not over, by the way. We could see more tomorrow. There's some pretty big permitted marches that are happening. But I'll be honest with you. I mean, look, it's a convention city. And when they start locking things down like this, they kind of all look the same, guys. The streets are closed. You can't get an Uber necessarily where you want to get to it. And they've really clamped down things. This perimeter is very intense. Not only was the president of the United States and the vice president involved here, but, we're coming off of an attempted assassination of a former president, and the Secret Service has doubled efforts along with local police here. I mean, you've got just crowds of Chicago police on every corner when you walk around town.
Well, fortunately, Joe, you don't need to go anywhere because you are stuck at the convention for the foreseeable future without any chance to actually leave and go get sleep or get any food. We'd certainly appreciate it. Joe Matthew, co-host of Bloomberg Balance of Power, live from Chicago. Don't miss Bloomberg Television and Radio's special coverage on the ground in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention. Joe, along with Kaylee Lyons, will be back for Balance of Power at 5 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Television and Radio. So that's the view from Chicago. What about a view of the economy and, in particular, jobs? Because U.S. job growth in the year through March was likely far less robust than initially estimated, which risks fueling concerns that the Fed is falling further behind the curve to lower interest rates. Take this, for example. Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo economists expect the government's preliminary benchmark revisions tomorrow to show that payrolls growth in the year through March was at least 600,000 jobs weaker than currently estimated, about 50,000 a month. We have with us Stuart Paul. He's U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. So, Stuart, there are a number of caveats in the preliminary figure, but a downward revision to employment of more than 51,000 would be the largest in 15 years, and it would also suggest the labor market has been cooling for longer. Are you thinking this way at Bloomberg Economics when it comes to revisions?
We are. We're actually a little bit more skeptical of the current official numbers coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Our best estimate is that the non-farm payrolls through March of 2024 are going to be revised down by a total of 800,000 jobs. So we're a bit higher than the 600,000 that are being estimated by Goldman and Wells Fargo. And we think that a lot of that downward revision is going to be backloaded, so mostly coming after the summer of 2023. And that points to material cooling in the labor market. Now, we know from the Fed that they've been saying that cooling of the labor market beyond what they had been expecting would warrant a change of policy. It would warrant the start of rate cuts. And we already know that the unemployment rate is above what they had been marking in the June summary of economic projections. When you then take out hundreds of thousands of jobs from what they had believed to be characteristic of labor market conditions, you're now talking about a much softer labor market. You're talking about underlying wage pressures and inflation pressures that are far less potent and far less buoying of economic dynamism and economic activity than they had previously expected.
So a lot of huge numbers being thrown around. I'm hoping you can just put this moment into context for us, because this is certainly the most I've ever cared about a revisions release, I have to say. It feels like everyone is laser focused on this right now. Is it unusual to see these types of revisions? I remember, it just feels like for the past couple months, that has been the caveat that we've been saying about, like, okay, we get the numbers at 8:30, but we'll really get the numbers in about a month's time. Is this truly unusual, though, that we are seeing such big revisions?
This is unusual because it's part of a quarterly re-estimation process, and even if you're looking at the lowest estimates of what these downward revisions would entail, it would still be the largest downward revision that we've seen in about 15 years. So it's pretty meaningful. Now, we're used to the BLS recognizing, as you were saying, well, our first crack at it, maybe it wasn't perfect. As part of the monthly non-farm payrolls estimates, they do survey about 100 to 150,000 businesses every month. But they then extrapolate out from those surveys to get an estimate of how many jobs were created throughout the entire economy, not just in that 100 to 150,000 jobs, 100 to 150,000 businesses. This quarterly estimation process looks at about 60 million business records, and so that helps to change the entire estimation process. And this is part of that re-benchmarking, that revision. This would be a big admission that their first crack at the data, their second crack at the data wasn't quite perfect.
What if it's not? What if it's not a big revision?
So let's say that the revision still came in under some of the lowest estimates and came in at just about 500,000 jobs, right? So then we're still talking about a downward revision of monthly job growth to the tune of about 60,000 jobs, right? So that's about a quarter of the annual pace of job growth that we saw last year on a monthly basis. That's still a pretty meaningful revision, right? 25% of the jobs that we thought we added every month during the past year just ends up disappearing because we're admitting that that our estimation process just wasn't great. So again, I think that is really just going to reorient the Fed and reorient the Fed's understanding of the labor market at a pivotal moment as we're marching towards the September FOMC meeting.
30 seconds left with you, but I remember after the most recent jobs report, I asked Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su, I mean, how can investors trust these numbers if we keep getting these massive revisions? And I mean, if you look forward and this dynamic continues, I mean, do you think that BLS credibility starts to get questioned?
I think that BLS credibility is already being questioned. I think that it's going to take a lot of effort to recalibrate some of their models, including the birth-death model, which is operative in the background of every monthly estimate for total payrolls. And I think that communication of that re-estimate is going to matter a lot for regaining that credibility.
Stuart Paul, thank you. U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics here in our Bloomberg studio. Coming up next, Democrats this season, well, for them, Fox News is getting too big to ignore. That story on the other side. This is Bloomberg.